Chapter 9:11. Dean felt that the temperature in the air suddenly dropped. It was obviously the hot early summer, but there was a feeling of 3 feet of ice. The cold air on his right hand seemed to be ready to move. A wisp of cold air flowed into his body along his blood, making him shiver with cold. Polar Ice Dragon chased after Horny and chased after Dean. Dean was so angry that he turned around and ran away. Holland was relieved to see that Polar Ice Dragon didn't chase him. At the same time, he looked at the dragon who was chasing after Dean. He didn't seem to have missed anything. It was reasonable to say that Dean didn't hurt the old dragon. So why was it chasing after Dean? At this time, Monica and Barker caught up. Seeing that Horny was still on the tree, Barker looked sullen and said, "Why aren't you making a move? This old dragon's scales are too thick. Only he can hurt it. If something happens to him, this operation will fail. I don't know what he did to anger it. I think we need to change our plan now. Since this old dragon wants to kill him regardless of anything, we'll let him lure it and we'll attack. I don't believe that with the strength of the 3 of us, we can't hurt it. If that's the case, we'd better retreat." Horny came back to his senses, looked at him, frowned, and said, "It's not that I don't want to help, but I can't stop it even if I do. It's determined to kill him, and I don't know what he did to anger it." Baker was startled. His eyes flashed as he saw the dragon chasing after Dean. "All right, let's go. Don't worry. He should be fine for a while," Holland suddenly said. Baker looked at him. "What do you mean? Didn't you see that the undead he controlled hasn't acted yet? It shows that this guy still has some strength left. He hasn't reached the point where he needs our help. I'd like to see what else he's hiding. This is a good opportunity." Horny licked his lips, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Barker understood and fell silent. "I think we should catch up to him as soon as possible. Although he is young, he is not someone to be trifled with. If we force him into a corner and he decides to walk away like he said, our losses will be too great," Monica said immediately when she saw that the 2 of them were prepared to wait for him. Barkle's heart trembled, and he immediately said, "That's right, that kid might really do it. Let's chase after him." Horny slightly frowned. He wanted to say something, but held back. He didn't know Dudian's character. In case Dudian really withdrew, then they would be embarrassed. If they withdrew, then they would lose a lot of people in vain. Even some of them would die on the way back. The 3 of them quickly caught up, but the distance between them and Dean was getting farther and farther. The 3 of them tried their best to catch up, but the distance between them wasn't shortened. The 3 of them were shocked when they saw that the dragon was 4 or 5 miles away from them. It was too fast. They could understand why the dragon was fast, but the dragon was chasing Dean. It didn't look back or even stop. It meant that it hadn't caught up yet. It also showed that Dean was faster than Polar Ice Dragon. Dean didn't think that he was fast. At the moment, he wanted to grow more legs or eat more pairs of wings. He was too slow. He felt that he had exhausted all his strength, but the dragon was still chasing after him. It was like a 100-meter race. He could accelerate in a short time, but it wouldn't last long. He was hoping that the dragon would exhaust its stamina earlier. However, his expectations were disappointed again and again. He felt that his feet and wings were heavy like lead. The ground under his feet was pulling his feet. When a person felt tired, the body would slow down. It was like triggering a self-protection mechanism. But humans had another layer of protection mechanism, and that was the fear of death. Dean didn't want to die, so although he was tired, he still ran fast. He gritted his teeth again and again, increasing his speed again and again. He glanced back with the corner of his eyes. The huge shadow was always hanging over his head, and the cold air was sweeping from behind. It seemed that if he was a little late, he would be drowned by the snowstorm. He saw Bach and the other 2 chasing after the Arctic Frost Dragon, but they were too far away, so far that he wanted nothing more than to turn around and beat them up. He did not expect that the 3 of them would actually work together to set him up. He had already noticed them when the 3 of them were discussing on the tree branch. Now that they were leisurely following behind him, it was obvious that they wanted to see him forced into a corner. Dean clenched his teeth as an idea came to his mind. He slowed down his speed while paying attention to the dragon behind him. The dragon opened its mouth and spat out a mouthful of cold air as he slowed down his speed. Dean hurriedly dodged and went to the other side. Arctic Frost Dragon's neck was very long, and as it moved its neck, a constant wave of cold air swept across the area. Everywhere it passed, the trees were all frozen, including the venomous snakes and strange insects that were hidden in the trees. Dean continued to run in circles. He found that the ice dragon's body would pause when it was spitting out cold air, although it was still flying forward, but the speed was very slow. He didn't know if it was to control the cold air it was spitting out. The cold air swept around, but didn't touch Dean. The dragon roared and rushed towards Dean. Dean hurriedly jumped down from the tree branch and landed on the forest ground. He turned and ran. Bang! Bang! The sound of trees breaking echoed. The wings of the dragon were like two huge metal knives that destroyed all the trees. The dragon's claws fell from the sky towards Dean. Dean's face changed as he rushed forward for 20 or 30 meters. He felt the ground shake behind him. It was the sound of the dragon's claws hitting the ground. He turned around and rushed towards Royal and others. The three of them saw the direction Dean was running in. They knew what Dean was thinking. They cursed in their hearts, but still rushed forward. "Hurry up!" Dean shouted as he sprinted again. Roar! The Arctic Frost Dragon landed in the middle of the forest and strode forward, causing the forest to rumble with every step. The monsters that were hiding in the forest all scattered in all directions. There were no zombies here, and any monster could feel the terrifying aura of the Arctic Ice Dragon. Holland was flying a little faster than Monica and Barker. He looked at Dudian, who was running towards him. He was about to open his mouth, but Dudian didn't seem to see him. He ran straight past him and headed towards the lake. Royal's face darkened. The next moment, his whole figure was shrouded in shadow. The dragon looked at the three people in front of it. It looked up to the sky and roared. A large amount of cold air appeared on its scales. Buck's eyes narrowed as he pulled out his sword. Amidst the hazy cold air, countless ice arrows suddenly shot out in all directions. The three's expressions changed, and they hurriedly brandished their weapons to block the ice arrows. However, the strength of the ice arrows was too great, and after continuously blocking them, the weapons in their hands were frozen by the ice arrows, and there were even traces of cracks appearing. "Damn, we can't stop it." Horny gritted his teeth as he glanced at Dean. He was so angry that he almost died. He saw that Dean had already disappeared. He didn't have any intention to attack the ice dragon. Barker waved his bone sword in a circle, but he still missed a few ice arrows and was stabbed in the shoulder. He pulled the sword out with a backhand, but there was no blood on the wound. His face was solemn as he shouted, "Let's retreat to the lake first and let the hunting team exhaust the enemies. It's too difficult for the three of us." Helene could not wait for him to say that, so he immediately turned around and ran. Roar! At this moment, the Arctic Ice Dragon, whose entire body was shrouded in ice fog, let out a long roar. With a swoosh, dozens of sharp ice thorns shot out from the ice fog. They swept over like vines and instantly arrived in front of Horny. Horny's pupils shrank, and his body hurriedly dodged, but there were too many ice thorns. He dodged 4, but was pierced in the chest by the 5th, and his whole body was nailed to the forest. Not good. Buck's face changed as he quickly retreated. The swarming icicles seemed to be too far away and stopped in front of Barkle. The next moment, the ice mist slowly dissipated, and the figure of the Arctic Frost Dragon appeared once again. As soon as it appeared, Barkle and Monica were stunned, and their faces instantly turned pale. At this moment, Arctic Frost Dragon's appearance had changed greatly. Although its body still retained its dragon form, snake-like ice tentacles had grown all over its body. They were wriggling softly like fur. Whoosh! Buck came back to his senses. He turned around and ran away without looking back. Monica heard the commotion and woke up with a start. She quickly ran behind Buckle. The dragon's roar came from behind again. Buck looked back and saw that the ice thorn that had nailed Royal to the ground had been lifted. It had actually pierced through Royal's body. At this moment, his chest was completely pierced. No matter what abilities he had, such an injury was enough to seriously injure him. When the ice thorn was lifted, Royal struggled violently and suddenly waved his weapon to cut it off. The next moment, his body fell along with the half of the ice thorn that had pierced through his body. But before he landed, more than a dozen ice thorns attacked him again. They intertwined with each other like sea urchins. At the place where the ice thorns intertwined, Royal's body was completely pierced through, and he was completely silent. Barker and Monica both saw this scene. The two of them couldn't believe it, and at the same time, they were a little frightened. Just by using ice, Horny was killed. This time, they knew that Horny wasn't acting. He was really dead. After all, even his head had been pierced through. There was no possibility of him surviving. Horny most likely still had some hidden cards, but it was a pity that he didn't have time to use them. Chapter 9:12. Dean noticed the situation in the rear. His heart turned cold as he saw Holland was killed by the dragon. How long has it been since they lost a member of the Abyss team? So far, they haven't even confronted the dragon. Run. Dean didn't have the idea of killing the dragon to find the ice worm. The price to pay was too high. Not only he would die, but Aisha would also have an accident. He didn't want to take the risk. Baker and Monica woke up as Dean ran at full speed. They looked at the dragon and the ice thorns that were continuously protruding from the ground. Although they were barely able to keep calm, but there was a trace of panic in their eyes. The dragon was too strong. They couldn't get close to it. Now they could control the cold air to turn into ice and attack from a distance. The key point was that its speed was very fast. Their eyes could barely catch the shadow of the ice thorns. It didn't take long for Dean to reach the lake. He looked at the people of the hunting group who were lying in ambush. They probably didn't know that Holland was dead, but some of them seemed to have sensed something. Dean stopped and called Aisha to his side. He turned to look at Baker and Monica, who were running at full speed. The ice blades were continuously shooting from behind and the huge body of the dragon. He took a deep breath and shouted, "Come here and fight back." Baker and Monica were busy avoiding the ice dragon's blades. Both of them looked at each other as they heard Dean's words. They were almost distracted and got hit by the ice dragon's blades. Dean looked at the two rushing over. His eyes flashed a trace of coldness. He stamped his feet and went to meet them. At the same time, he shouted, "Get ready to fight back." Barker and Monica were shocked. They didn't know where Dean got the courage to fight back. The strength revealed by the ice dragon wasn't of the Abyss level. The evaluation of the Monster Atlas was wrong. They were barely able to escape with their lives. But they didn't stop Dean as they saw him rushing towards them. As the three of them approached, Barkle's body slightly leaned to the side as if he was about to turn around. But the moment Dean got close, he suddenly backhanded his sword and stabbed at Dean, who was chasing after him. "Brat, don't blame me." Baker's heart was cold, but a crisp sound interrupted his thoughts. There was a trace of astonishment in his eyes. He saw that the bone sword in his hand was blocked by Dean's sharp blade. How? Baker felt incredible. How could he defend against the speed and suddenness of the sword? Could it be? He suddenly understood. He was glad, but also angry. At the same time, he felt a trace of fear. Dean's feelings were similar to Barker's. He didn't expect his sneak attack to be blocked. After a moment of astonishment, he understood. Then all the sharp blades on his body shot out like a hedgehog. Buckle was shocked and infuriated. He spun his bone sword, wanted to parry, but after a few clanging sounds, his bone sword was broken. This bone sword was the toughest material he had ever manifested after his demonization, but it was actually broken just like that. The sword was broken, and he couldn't resist Dean's other sharp blade attacks. His body was pierced by more than a dozen holes, and his arm was cut off. All of this happened in an instant. Monica saw it. She even thought of a sneak attack, but she didn't have the time to do it. She was shocked when she saw that Baker was defeated and seriously injured in an instant. Although she knew that Dean was very good at attacking and his body was extremely sharp, she didn't expect that the mysterious Baker would be defeated in one move. It must be known that this moment couldn't be delayed. Polar Ice Dragon was chasing after him. It was imminent. No matter what cards Baker had, this moment of defeat was fatal. After Dean attacked, he kicked Baker's chest and flew backward. At this moment, he couldn't continue to attack Monica. If the sneak attack on Baker was successful, then he would have the opportunity to attack again. But now Monica was on guard against him. If they continued to fight, Then all three of them would become polar ice dragon's meal. As he retreated, he controlled Aisha to turn around and fly to the other side of the lake at full speed. Baker's body flew backward. His face was extremely ugly. The injuries on his body healed quickly. This was his core ability, rapid regeneration. His biggest card was Immortal Body. The Immortal Body wasn't really immortal. Barkle wasn't afraid to deal with someone like Dean who had a strong physical destructive ability. No matter how his body was damaged, he could heal. Even if his skull was pierced or his heart was pierced, he could come back to life and recover. His demonic body was beyond the scope of human life. His brain wasn't the core that dominated his body. His heart wasn't the same. Instead, the bones of his body were the core of his body. He didn't care about fighting other abyss creatures as long as they didn't have corrosive abilities. His life-saving ability could be regarded as the top in the abyss. However, no matter how many times he could heal, it would be meaningless under the cold attack of Polar Ice Dragon. Ice and fire were polar opposites. Fire was the nemesis of all things, and so was ice. He controlled the bone wings to stabilize his body, but the cold air coming from his back made his body slowly stiffen. Even his mind slowly stiffened. Only the terrifying thought of death was left in his mind. At this moment, he suddenly became no different from an ordinary person. In the face of death, it seemed that no one was an exception. Strong cold air spread out, and Baker's body quickly froze. His bone wings could no longer flap, and his body slowly fell to the ground. His feet broke into several pieces of ice. Monica, who was running at full speed towards the lake, was shocked and sad when she saw Baker's miserable state. She didn't expect that the target of the long-planned hunt would be her. Monica quickly flew to the lake, but Polar Ice Dragon followed closely behind. The hunting group that was lying in ambush by the lake immediately rushed out from the soil and under the leaves of the forest. They were like a group of moths flying into a flame, rushing towards Polar Ice Dragon. Their figures were majestic and fearless. Their demonic bodies were strange, ferocious, and seemed to be full of power. Some of them had strange shapes and seemed to have magical abilities. But the moment they got close to Polar Ice Dragon, the cold air spread out from the scales of Polar Ice Dragon like a small hurricane. Then everyone was like fallen leaves in the autumn wind. They fell to the ground one after another and turned into ice sculptures. Their expressions were lifelike. Some were screaming, some were panic-stricken, some were stunned, and some were desperate. Chapter 9:13. Monica's face turned ugly as she saw the warriors of the hunting group fall one after another. She had some expectations for the human wave tactic, but it was completely ineffective. Although she knew that the human wave tactic was useless in the face of a real monster. But the warriors of the hunting group were not ordinary soldiers. The weakest of them was at the level of 10,000 killer. Moreover, there was a dominator leading them. Even if they were surrounded by so many people, they may not be able to escape. But the strength of the Arctic dragon was beyond her expectations, and its ability just happened to restrain the crowd tactics. In addition, Horny was dead, and Barker was frozen into an ice sculpture. The only ones left were her, Dean, and the Corpse King under Dean's control. Now that things had come to this, she naturally wouldn't seek cooperation with Dean anymore. Previously, Dean had taken the risk to counterattack and forced Baker into a desperate situation. She felt that if Baker didn't have the same thoughts, she would have been the next target after Dean's sneak attack was sure to succeed. The reason why Dean took the opportunity to get rid of them was obvious. His purpose was the power within the giant wall. If she and Holland were to die, then no one in the giant wall would be able to match Dean. She didn't know how many years would pass before the kingdom of God would know about Baker's death. Her first thought was to rush back to the giant wall. She didn't have any extravagant hope for Arctic Worm. She only hoped that she could return to the giant wall first and stabilize the situation. Then she could cooperate with the temple to resist Dean's invasion. Thinking of this, her figure flew over the lake and looked at the back of Dean and Aisha. Her eyes flashed, and she suddenly turned around and flew away. While Monica was flying in the other direction, Arctic dragon rushed out of the encirclement of the warriors of the hunting group. It roared angrily and soared into the sky. Its huge wings turned into a shadow that swept across the lake like a pair of scissors. It didn't chase after Monica, but went in the direction of Dean, who had already disappeared. Behind the Arctic dragon, the remaining warriors of the hunting group held their weapons and stayed where they were, not daring to chase after it. The ground around them was littered with broken ice and corpses. They were the companions they had been chatting with before, but in the blink of an eye, they were separated by life and death. Although the warriors of the hunting party had slow reactions, they knew by now that the so-called encirclement was a complete joke. From the very beginning, they had been hunted down and slaughtered by the Arctic frost dragon. The few abyss warriors that they had pinned their hopes on had not been able to do anything at all. All they cared about was running for their lives. When Monica's figure completely disappeared into the forest, everyone knew that they had been abandoned. Everyone's expressions were miserable. Some were resentful, some were in despair, some were in tears, and some knelt on the ground and begged. In the depths of the Devil Abyss, they did not have the protection of the Abyss. Staying here meant death, and returning also meant death. Dean and Aisha quickly moved forward in the snow forest. Along the way, they met a lot of monsters with ice physique. These monsters didn't emit any heat source. They were integrated with the forest. When Dean got close, some monsters would attack him. But before they could touch Dean, they would be pierced by his sharp limbs or directly cut into two halves. Dean's face slightly changed. He used the horn on the top of his head to look back. He saw the huge body of the Arctic dragon flying in the air. The trees in the forest along the way were bent by the strong wind. The dragon's roar was mixed with anger and murderous intent. Dean could clearly feel the killing intent of the old dragon. Dean wasn't aware of it when it chased him for the first and second time. But now the Arctic dragon was relentlessly chasing him. It completely ignored the others, as if it had a deep hatred towards him. He could basically guess the reason why it was attracted to him. In addition to the difference between the magic marks and the other three, there was only one difference. He had the flesh and blood of origami in his body. Although he couldn't control this power, but the light golden color of the demon's blade was enough to show that the power of the origami had penetrated into every part of his body. He knew that the origami was guarding the giant wall, which had a deterrent effect on the abyss. At the same time, the flesh and blood of the origami would also attract some powerful monsters. These monsters didn't know the horror of the flesh and blood of the origami, so they would be attracted to it. It was very likely that the Arctic dragon was attracted by the smell of the flesh and blood of origami. Dean was depressed and powerless. He couldn't cover up or get rid of the flesh and blood of origami in his body. It meant that he would be chased by the Arctic dragon until it didn't want to chase him anymore. But where was the bottom line of the dragon? Dean desperately ran out of the forest. He only hoped that it would stop after he got out of the forest. The dragon's roar was getting closer and closer. It seemed that it was above Dean's head. The sound shocked the surroundings. All the monsters in the nearby forest fled. It saved Dean a lot of trouble. Dean felt the light above his head dimmed. He looked up and saw that the Arctic dragon had caught up to him. Dean's face changed. He used all his strength to run, but still couldn't change the fact that the distance between them was getting closer. The Arctic dragon was faster than before. Roar! A dragon's roar rang out as the Arctic ice dragon opened its mouth and spat out a cloud of frigid air. Dean's pupils shrank. The range of the cold air was too wide. He quickly braked, but it was too late to escape. The cold air could freeze Baker, so naturally it could also freeze him. Once he was frozen, then he would be completely finished. Aisha! Dean clenched his teeth and quickly shook the bell. The bell rang at a very high frequency. Aisha, who had been silently following behind Dean, suddenly had a trace of bloodthirst in her eyes. The veil on her cheeks fluttered without any wind. Her body changed rapidly, and the bones in her whole body made cracking sounds. In the blink of an eye, she turned into a dragon-shaped monster. Her whole body was covered with flame-like red scales, and white spikes protruded from her spine. Her beautiful cheeks were covered with dragon scales and veins. She raised her head to look at the cold air descending from the sky, only to see that the snow-white trees were touched by the cold air, immediately making cracking sounds as they froze. Under the strong wind caused by the flapping of the dragon wings, some of the tree tips were broken and fell into pieces of ice. Roar! Aisha roared at the sky. Her voice was hoarse. It was somewhat similar to the roar of the Arctic dragon. A thick red light emerged from Aisha's chest to her neck. It seemed to contain a flame. She opened her mouth and spat out a magma-like flame towards the cold air. In an instant, the cold air was pierced and the flame was quickly annihilated. Chapter 9:14. As soon as he rushed out of the hole, he saw the mouth of the ice dragon pouncing towards him. Dean's pupils shrank. He twisted his wings and forcefully changed the trajectory of the ice dragon. He narrowly avoided the mouth of the ice dragon. Dean's sharp limbs were like dozens of black soft swords stabbing towards the dragon's neck. There was a ripping sound as the unstoppable sharp limb cut into the dragon's neck for less than half a meter before its momentum was greatly reduced. It was like a normal sword that had been cut into gravel and mud. It could only cut half a meter into the dragon's neck before it could go any further. It could only make use of the Arctic frost dragon's gliding momentum to slash sideways, leaving a dozen wounds on its body. Roar! The dragon roared angrily as it flapped its wings towards Dean. At the same time, it twisted its huge body and turned around to attack Dean again. Dean couldn't let Aisha preserve her strength anymore. Otherwise, both of them might die here. He released the control over Aisha and let her fall into a bloodthirsty fighting state. Roar! The same roar came out of Aisha's mouth. The scales and claws on her body rose by several inches. The scales on her chest and neck were burning with flames. The flames were getting stronger and stronger. It seemed that the scales couldn't suppress it anymore. The next moment, her whole body was burning with flames. She turned into a burning dragon woman. In the burning state, she rushed toward the dozen wounds on the dragon's neck. Her sharp claws instantly clasped the dragon's neck. She opened her mouth, revealing her originally white teeth at the moment. Her beautiful face became extremely hideous and even ugly. When she opened her mouth, there seemed to be flames spewing out from the depths of her throat. The next moment, she bit the dragon's neck wound. Arctic dragon seemed to feel the terror and threat. Its roar became more urgent and angry. But its body was too big, so it couldn't avoid Aisha, who had grabbed its neck. It couldn't twist its head to bite Aisha until Aisha bit it. Blazing flames overflowed from Aisha's mouth. The flames spread along the place where Aisha had bitten. It was like magma and blood as it tyrannically poured into Arctic dragon's neck. The ice-like neck was dyed red. The flames spread further and further before bursting out. Bang! Aisha was pushed away by the explosion, and Dean was also sent flying. Dean desperately tried to stabilize his body as he flew backward, so as not to touch the cold air that pervaded the surroundings. But at this moment, his eyes were sad and even painful. He didn't want to let Aisha participate in the battle because he didn't want to see her pure and flawless face like an angel showing such a bloodthirsty expression. But the reality always forced him to struggle at death's door again and humbly seek survival. Aisha fell into the cold air, but her body wasn't frozen. Instead, the cold air washed out a passage. By the time she fell to the ground, she had mitigated the impact to the minimum. She rolled and landed on the ground. Her toes touched the ground and once again rushed towards the dragon like an arrow from a bow. A large amount of cold air was emitted from the dragon's neck. It twisted its head and looked at Aisha, who was flying towards it again. It roared and spat out a rain of icicles towards Aisha. Aisha waved her dragon claws and used a set of extremely complex and high fighting skills. But she still couldn't avoid all the ice cones. Her body was stabbed one after another. The ice cones were strong and broke the hard dragon scales outside her body. But before they could stab deeper, they were melted by the flames on her body surface. Then they spread like steam. It seemed that her whole body was bathed in fire, but she was shrouded in hot steam. She was still fearless as she rushed forward. Dean was always paying attention to Aisha's safety, but soon he found that her performance was a bit strange. Compared to the past when she fought by instinct, now she was using skills. Whether it was aiming at the wound or the flame attack, it was purposeful. Did she know that the flame attack would cause additional damage to the dragon? If so, didn't it mean that she had wisdom? Was it the recovery of the past memories or the evolution of intelligence? Dean's face changed. Although he didn't want to admit that Aisha was a corpse king, but the fact couldn't be changed. He had to face the fact if he wanted to cure Aisha. Since it was a fact, he had to consider the changes of the corpse king. Generally, the corpse king would eventually evolve intelligence. No one knew whether it was the recovery of the past memories or the growth of a new species. Dean was attracted by the changes of Aisha. Aisha and the dragon were fighting again. Aisha was like a newborn dragon. She was roaring and fighting with the dragon. She was like a new warrior challenging the king of the old generation. The dragon roared again and again, but couldn't do anything to Aisha. Instead, Aisha cut several wounds on its body which couldn't be healed. Dean quickly sobered up and immediately joined the battle. He quietly flew from the side, while Aisha was restraining the dragon from the front. He circled around the dragon's tail. His sharp limbs rotated like a fan blade. The friction made a sharp sound as he suddenly waved it down. Several sharp limbs stacked together and slashed at the same spot, instantly sinking into the root of the Arctic frost dragon's tail, creating a huge wound. The tail was almost completely severed from the root. Ice Dragon had noticed Dean, but it didn't have time to pay attention to him. It was only when the tail was hit that it turned around and spat out ice thorns towards Dean. Dean's whole body was covered with sharp blades. It seemed that there were countless swords parrying the ice thorns, blocking them, splitting them, or flicking them away. But the impact of the ice thorns was extremely strong. Each ice thorn was like a boxer's fist, fiercely hitting his body. His body was hit by 2 ice thorns and pierced in his body. The cold spread in an instant, almost freezing his body. Dean didn't dare to face the attack again, so he moved sideways to escape. At this time, Aisha saw the opportunity and pounced on the abdomen of Arctic Dragon. Her dragon claws clasped on its snow-white belly, and the flaming claws dug deep. She opened her mouth to bite, and the sharp blades on her back were erected. Dragon scales grew on her wings, and they were all vertical, making the wingtips as sharp as a sharp knife. With flames, she stabbed towards the abdomen of Arctic Dragon. Arctic Dragon looked up and roared in pain. Its claws patted Aisha's body. Haisha slammed into the ground like a meteorite, knocking down a tree. Dean's eyes turned red as he roared and rushed towards the dragon. He used all his swords to cut the dragon's tail and spine. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of fine wounds were left on the dragon's body. Chapter 9:15. Polar Ice Dragon hissed in pain. The pain of its broken tail made it mad. Dean continued to cut its back, but an ice blade shot out from the root of the broken tail. It pierced through Dean's ribs and penetrated his body. Splitter's weakness was exposed at this moment. Its defense was far weaker than Aisha's dragon. Dean was stimulated by the pain and coldness. He immediately sobered up. He didn't expect that the broken tail could send out ice blades. He was caught off guard. He felt a burning pain in his chest. He quickly waved his arm to cut off the sharp blades. His body flew out and rushed towards the direction where Aisha fell. He just rushed halfway when he saw Aisha soar out of the dust. Her body was burning with flames. She screamed and rushed towards Polar Ice Dragon. Dean was relieved to see that she wasn't injured. There was a trace of hesitation in his heart when he saw her rush towards Polar Ice Dragon again. He was angry, but he knew that it was too difficult for him and Aisha to kill this old dragon. Moreover, he was injured. He pulled out the ice blade from his ribs and stopped the bleeding. But his chest was in pain. He wished that his body could lose the feeling of pain like his right arm. Although he wanted to retreat, he still chased after Aisha. The consequences would be unimaginable if he let Aisha block Polar Ice Dragon alone. Roar! Polar Ice Dragon howled in anger and pain. Its body fell from midair. It waved its wings and set off a hurricane that pushed Aisha away. Its body fell heavily on the ground. Aisha stopped her body and rushed towards Polar Ice Dragon again. It seemed that she wouldn't stop until she was dead. Extreme Ice Dragon opened its mouth and spewed out cold air. The cold air was wrapped with countless sharp blades which shot towards Aisha like raindrops. The flames on the surface of Aisha's body forced the ice away. She waved her dragon claws to smash the ice blades. But her body was still pierced by several ice blades. Only a few of the ice blades penetrated into her scales. The flames burned and melted the wounds. Dean approached from the other side. He was less than 30 meters away from Polar Ice Dragon. Polar Ice Dragon sensed him. It turned its head and spat out cold air. Dean wasn't Aisha, so he didn't dare to resist. His face slightly changed as he quickly turned and retreated. He sneaked from the other side. However, Glacial Ice Dragon seemed to have noticed him. When he approached from the other side, Glacial Ice Dragon sensed him again and used its frosty air to force him back. Dean saw that Ice Dragon was only focused on defense, and he couldn't get close to it for a while. Aisha was blocked by the sharp blades spat out by the dragon, so she couldn't get close to it. It seemed that they had the upper hand, but the longer the time dragged on, the weaker their advantage would be. He noticed that the cold air was getting thicker and thicker. If Ice Dragon was an Abyss-level human, then he would think that the real purpose of the dragon was to release cold air and completely cover the surrounding area. Once the surrounding area was completely immersed in cold air, then it would be the domain of Ice Dragon. Moreover, Aisha's body was covered in flames. The flames were made from her fat and energy. It consumed a lot of energy. Thinking of this, Dean's intention to retreat became stronger. After he was repelled again, he immediately shook the bell and called Aisha to open a path in the cold air, ready to retreat. Aisha stopped her offensive after she heard the bell. She flew towards Dean and continued to fly forward. Her whole body was burning with flames that dispelled the white mist. She was like a beacon. Dean followed him and quickly escaped. Now that he had cut off one of the Arctic frost dragon's tails, he felt that it would not chase after him again. Even if it did, it would not be as fast as before. For flying monsters, the tail was very useful. It was responsible for adjusting the body's balance and direction. Without a tail, its speed would be greatly reduced. Roar! Polar Ice Dragon roared in anger as it saw Dean and Aisha escape. It flapped its wings, but didn't chase them. In the blink of an eye, the cold air covered the path behind them. Dean was relieved when he heard the dragon's roar getting further and further away. It didn't take long for him and Aisha to rush out of the cold mist and rush into the forest at an extremely fast speed. The flames on Aisha's body gradually extinguished after they left the cold mist. There was some sticky blood on the surface of her scales. It exuded a strong, fishy smell. Dean and Aisha flew out for more than 30 miles before they slowly landed. Dean saw that the ice dragon didn't chase after them, so he and Aisha landed on a tree branch in the forest. He looked around and saw only a few small monsters hiding in the woods. He was relieved and released the devil's body. Aisha also released the devil's body. Dean saw 3 bloody holes on his chest ribs after restoring his human form. The flesh on the edge of the holes had stopped bleeding. He reached out and touched it. It was very cold. There was a little ice residue. The color of the ice was bright. It was frozen blood. Dean looked at Aisha and saw blood on the corner of her mouth. Her arm was strangely bent. His heart suddenly tightened. He used X-ray vision to take a closer look. It turned out that the bones in her arm were broken. His eyebrows slightly trembled a few times. He held her hand and slowly twisted it. Then he took out the medicine and a small scalpel from his backpack. He cut her arm open and picked out the bone debris. Then he stitched the arm and bandaged it with medicine. There was no major injury except for her arm. After curing Aisha, Dean sat on the branch next to him. He took off his armor and cut off all the frozen dead flesh on the edge of the bloody hole. He didn't have anesthesia, so he could only grimace and endure it. After cutting off the dead flesh, he applied medicine and bandaged the wound. He was sweating because of the pain and fatigue. He leaned against the tree and took deep breaths. The air in the forest was very fresh. There was still no movement in the rear. Dean estimated that the old dragon wouldn't chase them again. A guy with a hunting level of 372 is really powerful. Dean's mood was a bit complicated. If his previous guess was correct, then the dragon should belong to the group of monsters that were attracted to the flesh and blood of the origami. The group of monsters that were afraid of the flesh and blood of the origami were stronger than the dragon. They were the targets of the giant wall that was guarded by the origami's remains. He had originally thought that he was already considered a high-class person after reaching the abyss belonging to the top. But he was so embarrassed in front of the ice dragon. Horny was also in the abyss, but he was killed in seconds. Baker's life and death was unknown. Monica's luck was good, so she most likely escaped. What would be the end of him if he encountered the monsters that were afraid of the flesh of the origami? Dean didn't dare to think about it. The pressure in his heart was very big. He didn't know what kind of monsters the origami had fought against, but he knew that he was far from the origami. The origami could deter some terrifying existences by smell. The abyss wasn't the end of power. What was above the abyss? He didn't know. It took him a lot of twists and turns to reach the abyss. But now he was even more confused. Did he have to create nuclear weapons to get rid of all obstacles? If that was the case, wouldn't it create another Armageddon? Dean leaned against the tree. His thoughts drifted away. Many thoughts and puzzles appeared in his heart, leaving him silent. After resting for a quarter of an hour, Dean and Aisha continued to move forward. Although the ice dragon didn't chase them, but they were still in its territory and it could appear at any time. After half an hour, Dean came to a high mountain. There was a cave in the mountainside. There was a 7 or 8 meters tall tiger monster inside. The tiger monster looked like a tiger and a spider. Its body was strange, and its strength was close to the Dominator level. It was easily killed by Dean, but the green saliva it spat out before it died almost stained Dean's body. Although it was avoided, the green saliva fell on the rock. The seemingly hard rock melted in an instant. Moreover, it melted nearly 10 meters deep into the soil. Such a strong toxicity made Dean more and more careful. Although the monster's physique wasn't strong, but its toxicity was fierce. Even the abyss could be easily poisoned to death. Dean took a rest in a cave. He picked a few pieces of meat from the tiger monster and barbecued them to fill their stomachs with Aisha. After eating and resting, Dean was ready to continue the journey. This was the Devil's Pit. He could encounter the abyss at any time. Although he had X-ray perception, the range of visibility was limited. Moreover, he couldn't use it all the time to see the road. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Dean and Aisha hid in the cave and fed on the corpses of the tiger monsters. Dean would recall the knowledge recorded in the super chip. He used to memorize it by rote, but now he would think about it. Now he could use it flexibly. When he was tired of thinking about the knowledge, he would think about the previous battle and reflect on his mistakes. Dean's injury was more serious than Aisha's, but his healing speed was faster than her. Aisha's physique was strong, but the undead's physique caused her injury to become almost permanent. Her self-healing ability was extremely poor. However, Dean found that every time she ate fresh meat, her internal injuries would heal a little faster. Dean didn't directly leave the Devil's Pit after the injury was healed. Instead, he took Aisha back to the snow forest and quietly sneaked to the place where the previous battle took place. There was almost no change in the forest in 3 days. The forest was still in a mess because of the battle. Trees had collapsed. Dean found the place where the dragon's tail fell, but it was gone. There were a lot of ice cones scattered on the ground. There were claw marks of the dragon on the ground. Dean looked in the direction of the claw marks. It was back to the ice lake. Dean bypassed the ice lake from the other side of the forest and came to the place where he and Horny fought against the ice dragon. He found Horny's body. He was impaled and nailed to an ice blade from the ground. His body was tattered and half of his face was pierced by ice. He couldn't see the whole picture, but the clothes on his body belonged to him. At this moment, he had reverted from the demonic state to his human form. The body of the abyss was hanging in front of him. Dean sighed in his heart. Then he stepped forward and touched Holland's body. At the same time, he used his X-ray vision to scan it. He wanted to use his X-ray vision to see if there was anything hidden under Holland's clothes. He didn't expect to see a strange thing in his body. It was a pale white worm. Its shape was very similar to the parasitic soul worm. It was 2 or 3 centimeters long. The worm was curled up in Holland's head. It seemed to be nibbling his brain tissue. It was the only living thing in his body. Dean thought of some of the records of the Monster Research Institute. After the hunter died, the parasitic soul worm in his body would also die. He had seen a lot of dead hunters. It was indeed the case. However, the information didn't record the situation after the death of the abyss. This was the first time he saw the body of the abyss. Was this little worm Holland's parasitic soul worm? Dean felt that there was an 80 to 90% possibility. After all, the temperature in the forest was so low. Horny's body was hard and almost frozen. It was impossible for maggots to rot. There was no such a big maggot, unless it was a mutation. Dean stretched out his finger and scratched the top of Holland's head. His nails were sharper than knives. Holland's scalp was quickly cut open, but the skull was very hard. Dean couldn't cut it with his nails alone. However, he inserted 2 fingers into Holland's eye sockets and pressed his chin with the other hand. He pulled hard and opened his skull. He saw a small white worm wriggling on the frozen brain tissue inside. Dean felt a trace of itch in his scalp. He didn't directly reach out to touch the little thing. Some monster's abilities were too strange. Even the abyss would fall. He took out a small bottle from his backpack, pulled a small branch from the side, made a small wooden stick, and gently poked the little worm. The little worm's slow body was touched by the wooden stick. It suddenly shrank into the depths of Holland's brain tissue. Its speed was as fast as lightning. Dean was shocked to see it. He immediately cut off Holland's head from his neck to prevent the little thing from running into his body. It would be more troublesome to take it. He threw Holland's head on the stone next to him and slowly removed his brain tissue with a wooden stick. The little worm soon had nowhere to hide and drilled into Holland's nasal cavity. Dean took out a scalpel and cut open Holland's nasal bone. He dug out the little worm and put it in a small bottle. The little worm twisted in the bottle. Dean raised it and looked at it. Suddenly, he found that the little worm's body was slowly rising with white silk-like hair. The hair was so fine that he didn't notice it before. After the hair was lifted, the movement of the little worm slowed down. Just as Dean was about to put it away, all the hair on the little worm suddenly pierced the bottle. The special hard glass bottle was broken. Even a strong man with a stone may not be able to break it. But now it was broken by a little worm that was less than 3 centimeters long. After breaking the bottle, the little worm quickly fell and fell on the snow on the ground. It quickly escaped into the snow and ran forward. In the blink of an eye, it ran to a place where Dean couldn't see. When Dean hurriedly looked at it with his thermal vision, he couldn't see the slightest heat source. Chapter 9:16. Dean thought for a moment, but slowly turned away. He threw the broken bottle in his hand on the snow. He followed the battle route back to the forest by the lake. Before he got close, he could smell the faint smell of blood. If it weren't for the low temperature here, the smell would be even more obvious. Soon, he saw the place where the warriors of the hunting group were lying in ambush. There were broken ice and wreckage everywhere. There was half a frozen head with a frozen expression. There were also broken arms and sternum. In addition, there was also blood splashed on the white leaves, which had been covered with a faint layer of ice, like bloody spots. Duddian glanced at the ground. There weren't many corpses left. He estimated that there were at most 100 corpses. In other words, there were more than 200 people alive. However, most of them had already left this place. The ice dragon was chasing him and didn't pay attention to them. That was why they had the opportunity to leave. Dean was silent as he looked at the frozen arm in his hand. He could tell from the armor that it was Buck's arm. His body was frozen and fell into the forest after being kicked by Dean. However, Dean only found his arm. He didn't see any other limbs. He felt that Barkle was probably not dead. Maybe he had left. Dean sighed. He was also one of them. Sometimes he could see clearly, but he might not be able to do it alone. Dean looked at the frozen lake in the distance. He estimated that the old dragon was recuperating inside the lake. He was unwilling to give up. He had given up on snatching the ice worm, but later on he found out that the old dragon wasn't as powerful as he had imagined. He had underestimated his own strength. He felt that he should be a bit stronger than the Abyss experts. Moreover, he could use Aisha's flame to restrain the ice fog attack of the ice dragon. He should be able to contend for one or two. Although his chest was almost pierced and he died on the spot, the dragon's tail was broken. Both sides were injured. If this place is close to the giant wall, then I can take the steel from the wall to make several traps. Dean's eyes lit up as he looked at the surrounding woods. He had a glimmer of idea to hunt and kill the ice dragon. Hunting monsters by relying on head-on combat was the stupidest method. Previously, Horny, Baker, and others were here, and the warriors of the hunting group were not Dean's subordinates. Dean didn't say much. In fact, he felt that with so many pioneers cooperating, they could create a trap swamp nearby. Even if the strength of the ice dragon was twice as strong, it would still lose a layer of skin. At that time, he was worried that the Arctic ice dragon would not be able to withstand a single blow from the combination of the four Abyssals, the pioneer warriors, and the ruler. If the Arctic ice dragon was quickly killed, it would be their turn to fight for the Arctic ice worm. Therefore, he did not say much during the ambush. His purpose was to consume the warriors of Horny's hunting group, and at the same time, take the opportunity to see their true trump cards. However, the situation was reversed at the beginning of the battle. The subsequent changes were too fast. It was too late to organize everyone to carry out an effective ambush, leading to a one-sided massacre. Dean felt that this annihilation had something to do with his selfishness. If he was the leader, with so many people present, he could kill the old dragon even with his eyes closed. Now they were massacred and suffered heavy losses. Dean felt some regret in his heart, but he didn't feel guilty or blame himself. He believed that Baker and Monica also had the same idea. Even Holly was aware of their idea. He deliberately cooperated with them to weaken the number of warriors of the hunting group. He didn't carry out trap making and hunting preparation for a long time in advance. It was a pity that the Arctic frost dragon's display of power made their petty schemes seem laughable and pathetic. Now that he was the only one here, Dean felt that there was a chance to trap and kill the old dragon. It was just that it would take more time for him to prepare the trap. In the ancient primitive period, there was a great disparity between the strength of humans and beasts. But they dared to fight with bloodthirsty beasts with a wooden spear. This was the will to survive and the spirit of hunters. Now the strength gap between Dean and the dragon was smaller than the gap between a normal human and a tiger. It wasn't a one-sided massacre. At least he could fight back. So he felt that there was no reason for him to retreat. In the past few days, Dean had been thinking about this matter. He was hesitant, but finally decided to return to this place to see the situation. The lake was calm, and there was nothing to see. But he felt that it was necessary to try. After all, if he succeeded and got the ice worm, then his strength would increase a lot. At this point, he couldn't rely on the resources inside the giant wall to enhance his strength. He could only seek opportunities in the wilderness outside the giant wall. The adventure he was taking now was also to prepare for his arrival in the divine kingdom in the future. In a place where humans lived, power was needed even more. This kind of opportunity could only be encountered by chance, not sought. He did not want to be bullied and schemed against in the divine kingdom because he was too weak. That was another cruel world, and the price of being weak was also bloody. Dean and Aisha sat down at the edge of the forest. He looked at the surrounding environment and thought about the layout of the trap. Although the dragon's body was hard and invulnerable, it could still cause a lot of damage and impact if the tree was used as an arrow and the vine as a bow. If one tree wasn't enough, then he could use 10 trees. The force of the ejection from the tree wouldn't be good. Moreover, the size of the dragon was huge. Although its flying speed was very fast, but it wasn't flexible enough. These were its weaknesses. In the blink of an eye, a few hours passed. Dean thought of several hunting plans. He was about to get up and cut down the trees to make the trap. Suddenly, he felt the ground tremble slightly. His heart jumped as he looked at the lake. 2 to 3 seconds later, the calm surface of the lake suddenly bulged. The ice on the surface of the lake quickly shattered, and a huge figure leaped out of the lake, water splashing everywhere. Its huge, scissor-like wings spread open, and it landed on the shore of the lake. It was the Arctic frost dragon. Dean's pupils shrank as he held his breath. This Arctic frost dragon's tail had grown out, but it was much shorter than the previous one. After it landed on the shore, it shook its body and walked into the forest ahead. Its dragon claws rumbled on the ground, and its voice was low. Dean was relieved. He almost thought that the dragon was aware of his presence. He was ready to turn around and run away if he didn't see that the dragon was on the opposite side of the lake. Its healing speed is quite fast. Is it coming ashore to look for food? Dean's eyes lit up. The last battle was more intense. These large monsters needed tons of food to supplement their physical consumption. It was normal for them to hunt for food. Dean didn't leave. He was going to wait for the dragon to return to the lake. After waiting for 2 or 3 hours, Dean thought that the old dragon had abandoned its nest and migrated. But the dragon didn't land on the shore. It plunged into the lake and set off huge waves. The lake surged and the crushed ice on the shore. It looked like a guardrail made of swords and swords. Alive! Dean saw the thing in the dragon's mouth a second before it plunged into the lake. It was a bloodline yak that was about 3 meters in size. It wasn't an ice monster from the snow forest, but a monster from the plains outside the forest. Moreover, bloodline yak were in groups and were extremely violent. Their hunting level was 42. A single bloodline yak wasn't terrible, but a group of bloodline yaks was enough to make many monsters with hunting level over 100 flinch. In the depths of the Devil's Pit, bloodline yaks belonged to the food level. Dean found it strange because he didn't expect that the ice dragon didn't hunt the monsters in the snow forest. What was even more strange was that the ice dragon brought back a bloodline yak. The ice dragon didn't need to chew the bloodline yak. Was there any need to bring it back to the nest to enjoy? The waves of the lake were still rolling. The white figure of the dragon gradually sank to the bottom of the lake. Dudian stretched his head to look at the lake. The lake was very deep. He could barely see the depth of hundreds of meters. But he could see that the blood lion was exuding a slight heat of life. He was about to take back his eyes, but the heat source of the blood lion yak suddenly disappeared. Dean was surprised. Did he get swallowed by the ice dragon? Even if it was swallowed, the blood lion yak's body wouldn't immediately lose its heat source. It would slowly dissipate. He felt that it was a little strange, but he did not pay too much attention to it. After the lake had completely calmed down, he turned around and headed for the forest. He chopped down trees in a distant place and piled them up. While chopping down trees, he encountered some forest monsters. There were giant lizards with bodies as white as snow, giant pythons lurking under the snow, and strange insects living inside the giant trees. Dean killed the monsters. Some monsters used poison to attack him. He cut off their poison sacs or pulled out their fangs. He kept them as trap materials. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. Dean had cut down thousands of trees. During this time, he heard a slight dragon roar coming from the ice lake. He sensed that the dragon had gone out to look for food. He stopped making traps and rushed to the ice lake to wait. He found that the old dragon came back with a fat and round monster. It didn't have an ice physique either. If the first time was a coincidence, then the second time was the same. It was basically the old dragon's taste. This made Dean happy. He was worried about what to use as bait, but now it was simple. Dean peeled the bark of the felled trees and peeled off the surface. The inside of the tree was still rough. Fortunately, these giant trees lived in cold temperatures, so their trunks were extremely hard. Ordinary swords may not be able to cut them. Dudian lit a fire and refined the bark into tree oil. He smeared it on the trunk so that the surface of the trunk became smooth. Then he sharpened one end and made it into a giant bough. He found some vines and weaved the bough rope. There were few vines in the forest, so they were not tough enough. Dean could only peel the silk from the cocoon and weave it again. It was very time-consuming, so he could only do it alone. It took him 3 days to make 2 bows. The bows were fixed on the ground with several trees. The rope was made by himself. Tree arrows were the easiest to make. Dean picked a good position and waited for the dragon to go out to look for food. He dug a hole by the lake and buried the bow. In addition to the arrows, he prepared a giant net. He was going to use the net to catch the dragon in the air. Even if the dragon broke free from the net, it would take a lot of effort for the dragon to escape. Time passed unknowingly. In the blink of an eye, Dean had been at the ice lake for 3 months. There were traps all over the ice lake. Some of the traps were destroyed by monsters on the way. He had to dig a deep trench outside the traps and put stinky beast feces around the traps to stop the monsters from entering. In the last 3 months, besides making traps, Dean had figured out the pattern of ice dragons' predation. Almost once every 3 days, the dragon would bring back a monster. Moreover, the monster would suddenly lose its heat source once it entered the bottom of the lake. Dean was curious about this strange phenomenon. He even thought of diving into the lake to take a look. But in the end, he held back as he was worried that his smell would stay in the lake and arouse the vigilance of the old dragon. The sky was blue. Dean quietly waited by the lake. At noon, the lake rippled and the figure of the ice dragon soared out of it. Dean's eyes flashed as he stepped out of the forest. The dragon who was about to leave turned its head and roared at Dudian. It flapped its wings and flew over the lake towards Dudian. Dean saw that the dragon seemed to have forgotten who he was. He didn't rush to use the devil's body, but held the splitter tightly. Polar ice dragon fell from the sky and set off a gust of wind that messed up Dean's hair. It landed on the ground, opened its mouth, and bit towards Dean. It didn't seem to take Dean seriously. The moment it stretched its mouth, its sharp fangs were still stained with blood and flesh. Dean slid sideways and used the splitter to cut through the dragon's mouth. The sharp edge of the blade cut through the dragon's mouth. Dean held the sword and moved forward for 3 or 4 meters. He waited for the dragon to roar in pain before pulling out the sword and retreating. The dragon looked up to the sky and roared. It raised its wings in pain. It opened its mouth and spat out cold air. Dean was well prepared. He quickly soared into the forest after the successful blow. Chapter 9:17. Not surprisingly, Arctic Dragon roared and chased after Dean. Its huge wings set off a hurricane that blew away the snow in the surrounding forest. It opened its mouth and shot an ice blade towards Dean like an arrow. Dean turned around and swung the blade to cut off the ice blade. He dived towards the direction of the forest. The ice dragon caught up with Dudian. Its mouth stretched out and almost swallowed Dudian. Dean's eyes were cold, but he didn't panic. After flying for hundreds of meters, the dragon's cold breath pierced his spine. He glanced at the ground and saw a giant tree that was bent over in the snow. He swung his arm, and the ice blade on his body automatically fell off and pierced into the snow next to the giant tree. There was a faint thud, and the giant tree suddenly lifted up. At the same time, the snow on the ground of the giant tree also bounced up. The black rope was pulled straight out of the snow. The next moment, in the forest 10 meters ahead, several giant white shadows suddenly shot out. There were 6 sharpened giant trees. The trunks were smooth like 6 giant arrows that shot towards the back of Dean. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. The speed of the arrow was very fast. Both Dean and Arctic Dragon were only about 150 meters above the ground. Dean deliberately lowered the speed of the arrow. The momentum of the arrow reached its peak within this range and arrived in an instant. The dragon roared in anger. It wanted to avoid the arrows, but its body was too huge. It was difficult to turn around. Even if it moved sideways, it couldn't avoid the arrows. Bang! Bang! 6 explosive sounds rang out as the giant arrows struck the Arctic ice dragon. The strong impact caused the giant arrows to shatter instantly, filling the air with black dust. This dust was made up of countless tiny particles that completely surrounded the Arctic ice dragon. Roar! A furious dragon roar rang out from within the black mist. Cold air swirled, dispersing the black mist. However, the Arctic ice dragon's appearance had changed drastically. Its icy blue body had turned black and was covered in black particles. There was a trace of joy in Dean's eyes. The plan was going well. The purpose of the special arrows wasn't to injure the dragon. It turned out that the dragon only staggered a bit after being hit by the arrows. There were no wounds left on its body. However, the tree resin and tree oil that was brewed within the arrow had been sprayed onto Arctic frost dragon's body. The tree oil was also mixed with tree resin, which was extremely sticky. As for the puffy black mist, it was actually the powder of the crushed charcoal that had been released when the arrow was broken. The sticky tree oil that had been sprayed onto Arctic frost dragon's body caused the dragon's body to turn black. The reason why Dean thought of the charcoal powder was a coincidence. When he poured the tree oil into the hollow part of the giant arrow, it didn't take long for the tree oil to freeze due to the cold climate. So he had to dig a channel outside the hollow part of the giant tree and fill it with charcoal powder. The purpose was to keep warm and avoid the tree oil from freezing. Roar! Polar Ice Dragon was furious. It flapped its wings and spewed out a scorching breath. It accelerated towards Dean. Dean continued to fly forward. He once again threw out a sharp limb as he passed through a valley. He had figured out this technique in the last 3 months. It could be used as a long-range arrow attack. At this moment, the sharp limb became the key to activate the mechanism. When the sharp blade shot into the valley, the snow in the valley instantly loosened. From the snowflakes that filled the sky, a huge black shadow flew out at an extremely fast speed and swept into the air with the speed of lightning. The Arctic frost dragon sensed it and roared angrily as it flapped its wings, whipping up a strong gust of wind. The huge black shadow slowed down, but it still made contact with the Arctic frost dragon's abdomen. It was a huge black net that wrapped around the Arctic frost dragon's claws. Dudian saw that the net couldn't completely cover it. His heart was secretly regretful, but he didn't stop. His body continued to dive to a height of 100 meters from the ground. He threw a sharp blade into the forest. Bang! The snow in the forest bounced up as another giant net flew out. Caught off guard, Extreme Frost Dragon was caught off guard and was instantly trapped by the huge net. The net was huge, and it wrapped around Extreme Frost Dragon from head to tail. The stones at the bottom of the net were pulled together by the force of gravity and quickly knotted together. The wings of the dragon were bound by the giant net. It roared and struggled fiercely. It was about to tear the giant net apart when another giant net shot out from the ground. The net once again trapped the Extreme Frost Dragon. At the same time, 12 arrows shot out from all 4 directions, piercing towards the Extreme Frost Dragon like swords. Boom, boom, boom. The arrows shattered, and the tree oil inside sprayed out, splashing onto the Extreme Frost Dragon. The layer of charcoal outside the tree oil turned into a black mist, enveloping the Extreme Frost Dragon completely. Now, Dean's eyes flashed. The bells on his body shook. Roar! A low roar rang out from within the forest, followed by a blazing flame that shot out like a cannonball. Like a cannon, it struck the Arctic dragon's body. Bang! The next moment, flames emerged from the source of the sound and spread rapidly. It burned the black net and spread to other parts of the forest. The fire grew stronger as it touched the tree oil. The charcoal powder on the tree oil also fanned the flames at this moment. The Arctic frost dragon instantly turned into a blazing fire dragon, burning in midair like a cloud of fire. It looked up into the sky and roared in pain, but its wings were unable to break free. Its huge body suddenly fell from the sky like a burning meteor. A strong shock wave spread out, blowing away all the trees in the surrounding forest. There was a soft bang, followed by a violent collision and the sudden high-pitched scream of the Arctic ice dragon. He saw that the ground where the ice dragon fell completely collapsed. More than 200 meters of ground had collapsed. Sharp boulders were exposed under the collapsed ground. Some of the boulders were stained with green or black substances. It was the venom that Dean had extracted from the bodies of the monsters in the forest. Dean couldn't help but clench his fists as he heard the dragon's screams. Success. He did not expect things to go so smoothly. If Arctic Frost Dragon had broken free from the net, or if it had held on for a little longer, it would have landed 200 meters away from its original position. Then, all the effort he had put into the trap would have been in vain. He wasn't able to predict the specific area where the dragon would fall, so he deliberately dug more than 200 meters. In fact, with the size of the dragon, only a pit of 50 meters would be enough to accommodate it. Dean was excited, but he wasn't in a hurry to make a move. His trap wasn't over yet. He raised his hand and threw a sharp blade towards the distant forest. When the blade entered the forest, a huge shadow suddenly ejected out of the forest. It was a boulder with a length of 7 or 8 meters. At the same time, several boulders were ejected from the surrounding forest with the pit as the center. More than 20 boulders flew out of the trap. Some of them hit the outer edge of the pit, while others hit the dragon's body. Only 7 boulders hit the dragon. Dean had estimated that the dragon would fall at the best spot. Even so, he only set 7 boulders to fall at the same spot. It wasn't that he didn't want to set more, but he didn't expect that the plan would go so smoothly. Moreover, the boulders had higher requirements for the terrain. 7 boulders fell consecutively, and the Arctic Frost Dragon's screams became even louder. Although it had a strong physique, the impact of the boulders was no weaker than the Abyss's punch. The stone spikes that were pierced into its body were pierced even deeper by the impact of the boulders. The boulders broke and covered the dragon's body. Dean saw that the dragon couldn't struggle, so he flew over at full speed. If he had the time, he planned to fill the pit with tree oil, but it would take at least half a year to complete. However, for a monster like the Arctic dragon, half a year's time was not a long time to prepare. It could even be considered as hasty. Generally, a hunter would have to prepare for half a year to a year to hunt a level 20 or 30 monster. Sometimes, it could even take longer than that for the monster to be eaten by another monster. The dragon screamed as it lifted its burning wings to push away the boulders. It could feel Dean's approach. The dragon's eyes were filled with dark blue blood vessels. The next moment, a large amount of cold air spread out from its body. The originally vigorous flames quickly extinguished. Dean's body stopped as he saw the cold air diffusing out. His eyes flashed with killing intent. From the back of the forest, Aisha, who had transformed into a dragon, rushed out. Her body was bathed in flames as she plunged into the cold air. Dudian immediately followed him. Bang! Aisha roared as she lifted her claws and tore the dragon's wings. Dean followed behind her and used the liquid flame to disperse the cold air. He took advantage of the opportunity to attack the position next to her. The cutting blade was like a whirling sword as it cut the side of the dragon's back and chiseled out deep marks. The dragon roared in pain as it turned its body to flatten the stone spikes around the pit. Its claws twisted as it tried to grab Dean. Dean and Aisha were tightly attached to the side of its back. Dean used the 2 sharp blades on his back to stab into its body. The front of the blades extended a barb and firmly clasped the skin and flesh of the beast. He was like a blender. His whole body was pierced into the side of the beast's back, and soon a huge hole was chiseled out. On the other side, Aisha seemed to smell the blood. She immediately abandoned the dragon's wings and drilled into the hole that Dean dug. Dean could see a red shadow through the dragon's skin. The dragon's screams were extremely loud as Aisha drilled into the hole. Its body climbed up from the ground and staggered forward. However, it didn't fly out of the pit as it twisted and hit the rock wall of the pit. Dean took the opportunity to continue to cut the dragon's body. The area of the wound was getting bigger and bigger. The ice dragon violently struggled. The surrounding rocks and soil were frozen. Dean felt cold and shivered. Fortunately, Aisha was not far from him. He could barely resist the terrible cold. At the same time, there was a trace of inexplicable warmth in his heart. His attacks were getting sharper and faster to prevent the dragon from counterattacking. Aisha drilled into the dragon's body like a ball of flame. She climbed from the abdomen to the chest to the upper body. The screams of the dragon became more mournful as it clawed at the surrounding rock walls and ground. But it couldn't reach the back of the dragon to attack Dean. It couldn't reach into the dragon's body. Cold air was the strongest means of self-protection, but it was useless in the face of a nemesis like Aisha. Dean and Aisha had sent the dragon to the road of death when they chiseled the dragon's body. The dragon's roar gradually turned into a wail and eventually calmed down. Aisha drilled out of the dragon's throat. The flames around her body were dimmed. Dean jumped down from the dragon's back and went forward to support her. He looked at the blood on her body and the digestive residue in her messy organs. He was silent as he gently hugged her into his arms. Dean released her after a long time. He turned to look at the surrounding ground. He found that the place was in a mess. The dragon's body was like a crystal, but now it was scorched black. Aisha had torn a hole in one of the dragon's wings. There was a wound of 7 or 8 meters long and a 2 meters big hole in the side of its back. Several of its claws were broken. It seemed that they were broken by itself. There was a pit in its abdomen, which was caused by a giant arrow. No matter how majestic and beautiful it was before, it was weak and embarrassed when it died. Dean sighed once again. It was a luxury to die of old age here. Be patient, Dean whispered to Aisha. Aisha had reverted to her human form. Her body was dirty. She didn't respond to Dean's words. Dean went forward and cut off the head of the ice dragon. He used a sharp blade to chisel its skull. The brain tissue inside was still intact. He inserted the blade into the skull. But as soon as the blade pierced into the skull, a white chill suddenly shot out. Dean's pupils shrank as he dodged. At this time, he saw what was inside the Arctic frost dragon's head and heaved a sigh of relief. It was the ice worm. It was really here in the head of the Arctic frost dragon. The size of the ice worm was slightly smaller than the one Dean got before. Dean smiled and picked it up. The ice worm wanted to struggle, but its physique was only at the level of a dominator. When trying to spit out cold air again, Dudian immediately cut off its body and broke it into pieces of meat. He took out his backpack and put the ice worm into it. Dean was very happy to get the ice worm. He didn't expect to take the risk to get this little thing. Chapter 9:18. Dean took Aisha back to the ice lake after packing up the things. He was curious about the monster that the ice dragon had brought to the bottom of the lake and then suddenly disappeared. Dean let Aisha stay on the shore to take care of the luggage and the ice worm. Dean jumped into the water and stimulated the monster's body. He plunged straight into the depths of the lake. The deeper he dived, the darker the light became. Dean saw it more clearly. When he was 100 meters into the lake, he suddenly saw a huge oval shadow in the depths of the lake. After diving for more than 10 meters, Dean saw the appearance of the shadow and was shocked speechless. It was a saucer-shaped spaceship that was commonly seen in old era movies. The surface of the spaceship was covered in moss. He circled around the spaceship. The spaceship was so huge that even the size of the Arctic frost dragon could fit inside. He saw a part of the hull that didn't have any moss. The surface was slightly raised. It seemed to be a huge cabin door. There were a lot of scales of the dragon under the door. Dean's eyes moved as he went closer. He found that the cabin door wasn't closed. There was a small vent that led directly into the cabin. He swam along the secret passage. After swimming for 7 or 8 meters, he saw a faint light above the passage. He immediately floated up. His head left the water and came into contact with the air. It turned out to be an extremely wide cabin. There was no water inside. He climbed out of the secret passage and stood inside the cabin. He found that there were a lot of dragon scales and unknown monsters' hair on the cabin. There was a huge door next to the secret passage. There were dragon scales on the metal protrusions of the door. Presumably, the dragon scales were scraped by the dragon when it entered. But how did the dragon know how to open the cabin door? Moreover, how come there was no water in the cabin? Dean was at a loss as he couldn't figure it out. Soon he thought of the spaceship in Amelie's tribe. Were these two spaceships from the same race? He walked forward slowly, and the water on his body dripped onto the ground. As he walked forward slowly, his mind became clearer. The Arctic dragon knew how to enter this place, and it was most likely controlled by the Arctic worm in its mind. In other words, this could be the Arctic worm's spaceship. If that was the case, the Arctic worm might be an extraterrestrial life form. There were a few skeletons in the open space in the cabin. They were huge, most likely monsters that the Arctic frost dragon had hunted. In addition, in the corner of the cabin, there was a puddle of green mucus that exuded a fishy smell. Dean walked forward for more than 10 meters and saw 2 broken blades on the ground. His eyelids twitched. Humans had entered this place before? Or was it a human corpse brought back by the Arctic frost dragon? He picked up the broken blade and looked at it. There was no dust on it. It seemed to have fallen off not long ago. There was a sticky liquid on the edge of the blade. He did not dare to touch it. Dean gently put down the broken blade and continued to walk forward slowly. At the same time, he used his X-ray vision to scan the surroundings. He soon found that the material of the spaceship was the same as the material of the coffin that had frozen Sylvia. His X-ray vision couldn't penetrate it. The inside of the spaceship was covered with a red mesh of metal. His heart tightened. He didn't know if there were any living things inside. At this time, he regretted leaving Aisha on the shore. This thought made him realize that Aisha brought him a sense of security in addition to hope. He slowly walked forward along the passage in the cabin. The soles of his feet didn't make sound. He found that the passage in the cabin was not only metal, but also the intestines of a certain animal. The passage was stained with sticky liquid that exuded a fishy and foul smell. Some of the connecting belts in the cabin were shaped like the muscles of insects. It was disgusting and strange. It was too quiet. Dean could only hear his heartbeat. It was getting louder and louder. He had to use dragon blood technique to control his heartbeat and suppress his bodily functions. He slowly moved forward like a ghost. He walked along the passage for more than 10 minutes. He passed several cabins and rooms along the way. Some of the doors were closed. The doors were stained with white ice. From the traces of the ice, it looked like sputtered blood. Some of the doors were open. There were dried corpses lying on the ground. They looked like multi-jointed insects that had been dead for a long time. However, they seemed to be in a deep sleep and would wake up at any time. Dean's body was overflowing with cold sweat. There was a kind of repressed, trembling feeling. It seemed that something terrible was waiting for him in front of him. He almost stopped breathing as he walked forward step by step. He noticed that the metal protrusions on the cabin floor were scraping against the dragon's scales. He was able to breathe a little bit. He went forward along the passage. Some of the lights in the passage were bright, but some were broken. The passage was shrouded in a black and white haze. The more he moved forward, the deeper the darkness became. Dean seemed to have an illusion. At the edge of the passage, the darkness extended out like a tentacle and reached out to him. He was ready to fight at any time. He gritted his teeth and slowly walked to the exit at the end of the passage. The scene in front of him made his heart twitch. He even had the impulse to turn around and run away. The exit of the passage was a huge, dark space. Metal pipes that looked like insect muscles spread around the dark space. They were connected to the wall like the vines of a dead tree or scattered intestines. Bursts of stench came from inside. In the center of the space, there was a pile of black root-like objects. Complex pipes extended from them and connected to the wall. Below the black root-like objects, 2 rows of thick branches extended out like blood vessels. The surface of the branches was sticky with a green liquid. It seemed that they had not been washed for hundreds of years. Below the branches, there were pupae of different sizes hanging down. The darkness couldn't block Dean's vision. At a glance, he saw a pale human face on several of the pupae. On the other 2 huge pupae, there were 2 strange heads. One of them was the head of a blood lion yak. Dean suddenly understood why the ice dragon would capture the prey. It was sent here. No wonder the prey suddenly disappeared. It turned out that the spaceship was blocking his view of the heat source. In the center of the black root-like objects, there was a giant worm with 7 or 8 white tentacles. The worm's body was like a magnified peanut. It was snow white and had a smooth surface. It had no eyes or mouth. If it wasn't for the ferocious tentacles connected to its body, no one would think that it was a living creature. Dean held his breath and did not dare to make the slightest sound. He had never seen such a strange thing. The most terrifying thing was that he found that this thing was alive. Something was constantly being pulled out of the chrysalis and flowing into the body of this thing. The Arctic frost dragon was actually raising such a strange creature. No, it should be said that the worm in its head was feeding this thing. Dean felt that he had seen some secrets hidden in the deepest part of the world. He didn't know whether this thing was the most terrifying existence or not. But now he just wanted to get out of here. Just as Dean was about to turn around and retreat, he suddenly heard a rustling sound. Dean's retreating footsteps stiffened. He saw 7 or 8 white fat figures drilled out of the holes in the black roots. Their white bodies were in sharp contrast to the dark roots. He recognized these weird things at a glance. He was even familiar with them. Ice worms. These 7 or 8 things that came out were all extreme ice worms. Dean couldn't believe it. In order to capture an ice worm, Horny had gathered a lot of people, but they had failed miserably. Now in the depths of the lake, there were 7 or 8 ice worms in the mysterious spaceship. It was enough to create 7 or 8 abysses. Dean was shocked. The ice worms slightly raised their bodies like vipers. It seemed that they were looking at Dean. They gathered around the snow-white peanut like multi-tentacled monster. They quietly observed for a moment. 2 of the ice worms suddenly crawled along the viscous pipe. They were very fast and swam to the top of the pupae. One of the pupae was a human, and the other was a ferocious long monster. The next moment, the 2 ice worms climbed up the pupae and drilled into the surface of the pupae through an unknown substance. After a moment, the substance on the surface of the pupae slightly bulged and burst open. The long pupae fell to the ground, and a monster came out. It had an insect-like head and a snake-like body. It crawled on the ground and had a very long tail. Another human pupae also fell down. There was a naked woman inside the pupae. Her body was stained with a sticky liquid. Her full chest was slightly undulating. There was a heartbeat. Dean's eyelids twitched as he glanced at the rest of the pupae. His eyes narrowed and his heart turned cold. He saw Barkle. Barkle was tightly wrapped. Only his facial features were exposed. He was very pale. Dean didn't recognize him at first. Barkle was caught and turned into a pupae. No wonder he couldn't find Barkle's body. In addition to Barkle, Dean suddenly saw a familiar face. It seemed that he had seen it before. It was the abyss that he met before he came to Barkle's giant wall. At that time, he hadn't become the abyss yet. It wasn't easy for him to get rid of the abyss. He didn't expect to meet him here. Roar! The crocodile-like monster roared and rushed towards Dean. Dean's face changed. He quickly turned and ran. Whoosh! Dean used the horn on top of his head to look back. He saw the naked woman chasing after him. Her speed was faster than the monster next to her. The strangest thing was that there was an ice worm coiled around her neck. If he looked carefully, he could even see that one end of the ice worm was wrapped around the top of her head. It seemed to extend from her ears. Was it the ice worm that was controlling it? Dean didn't dare to stay. He quickly rushed forward along the cabin. The naked woman was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, she caught up with him. She raised her hand and patted Dean's back. Dean was shocked. The sharp blade on his back swung his limbs and strangled him like a fan. Ice suddenly spread on the naked woman's arm, covering her whole arm. She reached out and grabbed the rotating blade-like limbs. The blade-like limbs cut through the ice on her arm, but failed to cut off her arm. Instead, her 5 fingers fearlessly stretched out and grabbed one of Dean's blade-like limbs. Hiss! The ice worm wrapped around her neck, opened its mouth like a white viper, and hissed. The naked woman exerted strength in her arm and pulled back. Dean's face changed slightly, and he moved his body. Bang! The naked woman pulled the sharp blade and retreated, almost falling down. Dean's speed did not decrease, and he continued to rush forward, like a gecko with its tail broken. He only wanted to protect himself. Hiss! The extreme ice worm on the neck of the naked lady let out an angry roar. Its snake-like mouth was filled with dense rows of sharp teeth. Under its control, the naked lady once again charged forward with the speed of a shooting star. Dean was shocked. The naked woman's physical fitness was so strong. She didn't enter her demonic body, but she could still catch up with him. This should have nothing to do with the ice worm's control. After all, the huge monster behind them was now 40 to 50 meters behind them. Seeing that the naked woman was approaching again, Dean suddenly threw out a sharp blade. Like a spinning top, a sharp blade storm, he strangled the woman. The naked woman's body quickly froze. She used her hands to protect her body. The sharp blades slashed out thousands of times in a flash. The ice on her arms was cut into pieces, and dozens of fine wounds were left. But strangely, there was no blood flowing out of the wounds. Dean saw that he couldn't kill her. He didn't look back as soon as he landed on the ground. The naked woman madly chased after him again. The ice worm on her shoulder screamed. Dean looked at the exit of the cabin that was getting closer and closer. He suddenly thought that the ice worm could control the cold air. Wouldn't it be able to burst out at a faster speed when he got out of the lake? Even if it couldn't, wouldn't it be more dangerous if it used the cold air to control the lake water? At this moment, his brain was working very fast. He suddenly stopped his body. The naked woman, who was more than 10 meters behind, did not stop. When Dean stopped, she immediately chased after him. Her whole body froze. The ice protruded like a sharp blade. She raised her hand to grab Dean. Her chest was also protruding with ice thorns. Once she grabbed him, Dean's body would immediately be pierced by the thorns on her chest. Dean's eyes flashed brightly at this moment. He turned around. At the moment of life and death, his hands suddenly returned to the shape of human arms. His 5 fingers pinched the naked woman's arm. His body bounced up. The sharp blades on his shoulder and back shot out like lightning. They didn't attack the naked woman, but swept towards the ice worm on her shoulder. The ice worm screamed and tried to control the naked woman to raise her hands to block the attack. However, the woman's hands were tightly held by Dean and couldn't break free for a while. Everything happened in an instant. The ice worm was cut into pieces, and its body fell to the ground like a few lumps of white meat. The sharp end that was pierced into the naked woman's ear also slid out. Dean breathed a sigh of relief, but he saw the naked woman suddenly soften. At the same time, a rumbling sound came from the rear of the cabin. The crocodile-like monster was menacingly chasing after them. Chapter 919. The water was cold. Dean held his breath, flapped his wings, and swam to the lake at full speed. Bang! When he swam out 40 or 50 meters, the spaceship at the bottom of the lake suddenly shook, and a burst of air waves came. The next moment, the giant crocodile-like monster rushed out of the spaceship, wagging its tail, and quickly chased from the bottom of the lake. Dean's whole body was like the wings of a fighter, so that the water penetrated without hindrance. His figure rushed out of the lake and soared into the air. Roar! The moment he drilled out of the water, the lake bulged, and a bloody mouth swallowed from the lake. The moment the big mouth closed, Dean flew out from the front of the mouth, narrowly escaping the monster's bite. He flew 70 or 80 meters into the air, and then quickly flew to the side of the lake. After the crocodile-like monster bit the air, its body fell into the lake, causing the lake to flood. It swam in the lake at full speed in the direction that Dean flew to. The sharp blades on its back were exposed on the surface of the lake, like the dorsal fins of 7 or 8 sharks. Dean flew to Aisha's side by the lake. After landing, he threw the naked woman on his shoulder on the shore and suddenly turned around. The sharp blades on his body were erected, and the soles of his feet stomped on the ground and rushed back. Roar! The monster rushed out of the lake and once again opened its bloody mouth to bite. Dean, like a black bullet, spun and flew into its mouth. The mouth closed, and with a bang, Dean's figure instantly broke out from the black cuticle inside its skull. The monster howled and fell on the shore. After defeating it, Dean didn't continue to attack. He swooped down, picked up the naked woman, and called Aisha to fly together and rushed to the distant forest. The monster's huge body shook, trying to climb up, but the skull injury was too serious and fell down several times. Blood flowed out of the skull and slid down along the sharp teeth of the mouth, dyeing the shore red. Dean was a little relieved to see that it didn't chase after him. He flew to the body of the dragon and arrived in 10 minutes. He looked back and still didn't see any pursuers, so he waved a sharp blade to cut off the new tail of the dragon. The tail was about 7 or 8 meters long. Dean cut off the tail and gave it to Aisha so that she could carry it. They continued to fly around the forest and went back the way they came. Although there were ice worms in the head of the monster and the spaceship, Dean didn't dare to be greedy. With his strength, there should be no problem to kill the monsters and humans controlled by the ice worms, but he was worried that the peanut-like snow-white strange creature would chase after him. It gave him a strong sense of fear, and he didn't know whether it would wake up or not. After a while, Dean flew out of the forest with Aisha. He didn't stop, and after landing on the ground, he continued to move along the road back. Along the way, he saw a lot of broken limbs, bodies, weapons, and armors. Dean had some impression of these armors. They were the armor of the warriors of the hunting group, and some of the broken limbs were relatively fresh. Most of them were the warriors of the hunting group who died on the way back. Dean followed their footprints. Half a day later, he came to Barren Mountain Forest and stopped. Continuous rapid travel had consumed a lot of his physical strength. Fortunately, he did not encounter any strong monsters on the way, only some Dominator-level and Pioneer-level monsters. These kinds of monsters could only be regarded as small monsters for him now. As long as he was not careless, he would not fail miserably in a ditch. Dean lit a fire and cut off 20 centimeters of the dragon's tail. The dragon's body contained a strong amount of radiation. It was poison for Dean, but it was a great supplement for Aisha. After several thrilling battles, Dean realized the importance of Aisha. Although he didn't deliberately cultivate Aisha's physique, but in the 2 years he was the Wall Lord, Aisha had naturally awakened her physique. She had completed 7 awakenings. The original 7th awakening of the Witcher's physique had surpassed the Dominator and was stronger than the General Abyss. Because of the Undead's physique, Aisha's physical function was several times stronger than the ordinary 7th awakening. Even the Abyss like Holland couldn't compete with Aisha. This could be seen from the Battle of Arctic Ice Dragon. Holland, Baker, and others had no resistance in front of Arctic Ice Dragon. It was difficult to bear a casual dragon claw attack. Aisha was able to avoid the attack. Even if she was injured, it wasn't a big deal. However, now the enemies Dean faced were getting stronger and stronger. Sometimes he might not be able to deal with them by himself, so he needed Aisha's strength. The stronger Aisha's strength was, the more help she would be to Dean. He didn't intend to let Aisha eat crazily to help her increase her strength explosively. First, he was worried that her strength would be too strong, and there would be unpredictable changes that would no longer be under his control. Second, he was worried that Aisha's body would awaken a new consciousness. If that day came, would he be able to resurrect her? In addition to these 2 points, he always felt guilty if he let her eat too much to increase her strength. It seemed that he would treat her as his weapon in battle. This kind of contradictory mood sometimes made him feel a bit pretentious. It was the main reason why he couldn't make up his mind to give Aisha a large amount of food. However, Dean was willing to try to choose high-level monsters' flesh and blood so that even if he couldn't increase Aisha's strength, he could supplement her body consumption. After the dragon's tail was roasted, Dean handed the knife inserted in the dragon's tail to Aisha. While she was eating, his eyes shifted to the naked woman next to him. There was a thoughtful look in his eyes. Although he was not close to women and was even a little virgin, he had a strong self-control over women. Moreover, he had seen too many bloody scenes in the past, especially on the battlefield, where the severed limbs of men and women were piled up. At that time, there seemed to be no distinction between men and women, not even the distinction between humans and beasts. All the body parts were like pork in a slaughterhouse, revolting. Generally, hunters or warriors who had seen these bloody pictures would have a big change in temperament. They would even be extremely raging on the woman's body. Dean was cautious. Aisha was almost isolated from women, so he had very few impulses in this aspect. At this moment, Looking at the naked woman was like looking at a sculpture or even a skeleton. The tragic state of a beautiful woman after being cut off would make people cut off their evil thoughts. In Dean's eyes, the woman was like a corpse, and an extremely strange one at that. From a man's point of view, this naked woman's face was very exquisite and beautiful. She had a head of light golden curly hair, a high-nose bridge, and long eyelashes above her tightly closed eyes that were still stained with a bit of white ice. Her body was slender without any excess fat, and her lower abdomen was flat. Her legs were slender and full of beauty, but they also contained great power. Her toes were like shells, slender and soft. Other than her extremely pale skin, there was nothing eye-catching about her, enough to arouse the primal impulse of any male. Dean was lost in thought as he looked at her body. He thought of the disgusting and distorted scene in the spaceship. Pupae were hanging in the dirty and dark place. Green mucus could be seen everywhere on the ground. The stench of the putrid smell seemed to be swirling in his nostrils, making him frown slightly. Is this the iceworm's nest? How many places like this are there? How strong would the white monster at the core be after it woke up? Does the kingdom of God know about such a place? One question after another appeared in his mind. He felt that the God Kingdom should also have such a thing, and there must be more than one such spaceship. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the God Kingdom, which had been in charge of this land for hundreds of years, to not know that he, a traveler of the abyss, had come across such a thing by chance during a random hunt in the demonic abyss. The Kingdom of God. How many secrets does it know? Dean sighed in his heart. After Aisha was done eating, Dean carried the naked woman on his back and hurried on with his journey. Dean came to a lush forest surrounding a lake when it was dark. He didn't dare to stop. He took advantage of the last touch of dusk to continue to move forward for more than 20 miles. He came to a grassy plain. Huge monster wreckage could be seen everywhere on this plain. It was a record of what happened in this land every day. In addition, there were collapsed buildings. Some of the buildings were huge statues, but the people on the statues had already fallen. They were trampled into cement fragments and submerged in the surrounding soil. The base of the statue was still there, but it was buried in the ground. Dean used his X-ray vision and found that many buildings were buried under the sand. He dug out a piece of land and drilled into the basement of a buried house. He found a rusty car parked inside. He took Aisha and the naked woman into the car. He saw 3 skeletons tied to the seatbelt, 2 big and 1 small. It seemed that they belonged to a family of 3. The empty eye sockets of the skeleton looked at Dean. The next moment, Dean sat on its body and the skeleton was smashed. Dean let Aisha sit in the front while he and the naked woman sat in the back. This was to prevent the naked woman from quietly waking up and waiting for an opportunity to attack. The 3 of them hid in the dark underground. Dean leaned on the car's seat and adjusted his breathing. He felt that time was passing quietly. There was no wind, no sound. He looked at the soil and darkness outside the window. He was slightly dazed and suddenly wanted to light a cigarette. But he wasn't addicted to smoking, and he didn't have a cigarette with him. He could only give up. When people were quiet, they would be in a daze. Their thoughts would drift. They would think of one thing and then another. There was no mobile phone or entertainment here. Dean could only imagine the future and miss the past. The more he missed the past, the more he wanted to change something. The more he wanted to change, the more he found that he had nothing and was terribly poor. He didn't know how long it had been. The roars of monsters and howls from a distance gradually appeared on the plains outside. There was also the sound of some hamster-sized things crawling on the ground and rustling the grass roots. Monsters of all classes came out to look for food on this lonely night. The footsteps of these monsters and the roars of fighting became background music in Dean's ears. He held his arms and fell into a state of drowsiness and wakefulness. The night passed in the blink of an eye. Dean kicked the roof of the car. The rusty iron was broken, and the sand above splashed. Dean pulled the naked woman and jumped to the ground. They continued to hurry on the road. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. 2 figures flew over from the border of the Devil's Pit. Dean was carrying the naked woman on his shoulder. The dragon tail on Aisha's shoulder was less than 3 meters long. Dean heaved a sigh of relief and looked around. He remembered the route and continued to move forward with Aisha. There were a lot of bloodstains on his armor. During the past 3 days, he had encountered a lot of monsters. It had to be said that the number of monsters in the Devil Pit was extremely high. Apart from some barren lands where there were fewer monsters, as long as there were lakes and forests with abundant water sources, there would be groups of monsters gathering. However, the number of monsters living in the barren areas was small, but it was more difficult to deal with. Fortunately, Dean wasn't a master who had just stepped out of Sylvia's territory. He was a veteran of the Abyss. He had the help of Aisha, so he rushed out of the Devil's Pit safely. Dean returned to the giant wall after leaving the Devil's Pit. I wonder what Monica is waiting for me. Dean thought about the things that would happen after returning to the giant wall. He only saw the wreckage of the warriors of the hunting group. He didn't see Monica's body. He thought that there should be a great hope for her to get out of the Devil's Pit with her Abyss physique. Of course, he didn't rule out that she was extremely unlucky and met a terrible monster and was eaten. However, Dean didn't think that such a good thing would fall on his head. Although there was only Monica left in the giant wall, but Dean still didn't dare to be careless. The group of 9 that invaded Sylvia was too careless. Eventually, they were defeated by overwhelming power. The lesson was right in front of him. He wouldn't repeat the same mistake. The sun was shining. After flying for 40 or 50 miles, Dean landed on a hill surrounded by withered yellow weeds. He glanced at the naked woman in his hand and threw her into the grass. "How long do you want me to hold you?" The naked woman rolled into the grass and didn't move. "Don't pretend. Your heartbeat has betrayed you," Dean indifferently said. Hearing this, Felicia knew that she couldn't pretend anymore. She sat up and slowly opened her eyes. This was the first time she had opened her eyes in the past few days. The strong light from Dean's head made her squint. She couldn't even see his face clearly. "Where is this? Who are you?" Felicia looked around and took a deep breath to calm herself down. Chapter 920. Phineas rolled her eyes. "How should I address benefactor? My name is Dean. This is my lover, Aisha." Dean looked down at Phineas. "How should I address you?" Phineas's eyes swept over Aisha's body. She didn't open her eyes because she was afraid of being detected by Dean, but she was aware that there was a powerful undead beside Dean. She was shocked and confused, so she was very calm at the moment. She didn't show any strange expression. "My name is Phineas. I want to know your identity." Dean stared at her as he expressed his will. Phineas frowned slightly. Dean said that he wanted to know, implying that she had to say it. She knew that she had no room to resist. She said after a little thought, "My identity is very ordinary. I'm just a demon hunter. I accidentally fell into a trap and was caught by the thing at the bottom of the lake. You've seen what happened afterwards. As for the process, I don't have any memory, so I can't tell you in detail. I said that I want to know your identity. Don't skip it." Dean looked at her naked body, but there was no ripple in his eyes. "As your benefactor, my request isn't too much. You don't have to worry about other things. I'm not so extravagant as to save you. I won't wait for you to finish talking before killing you. There's a saying that more friends means more roads. Of course, the premise is whether you are worthy of being my friend." Phineas's eyes slightly moved, although Dean's words were impolite, but his attitude was very calm. She didn't feel disgusted. Instead, she quietly sighed in relief. Benefactor's words are reasonable. As I said before, I'm a demon hunter from the 5th hunting squad of the Bloodthorn Legion. I'm the captain, although I don't know how you rescued me, but you should have seen my other companions. They are my teammates. The Bloodthorn Army? Dean narrowed his eyes. He was surprised that the woman was from the Kingdom of God. Moreover, she was just a captain of the Bloodthorn Legion. There were 4 squads in front of her, and even more squads were lined up behind her. Dean had seen the members of the Abyss that he had met in the wilderness. It was very likely that they were her members. When he turned back, he saw a bonfire. From the traces, there were 4 to 5 people, which matched Felicia's description. In other words, the Divine Kingdom's Bloodthorn Army had at least 25 Abyss-level experts, perhaps even double that number. This was just a nameless divine kingdom army. The kingdom of God that had been shrouded in mist suddenly became clear in Dean's mind. He had expected that the kingdom of God would be extremely powerful, but what Felicia said was still beyond his expectations. One must know that each giant wall only had one abyssal guardian. It was no wonder that the giant wall had no ability to resist in front of the kingdom of God. However, how many giant walls were there in this world? Dean didn't know. He didn't ask Felicia as it would expose too much information. He pondered and asked, "You didn't come here just to pass by. Are you also here for the ice worm?" "That's not it." Felicia shook her head. Dean chuckled and interrupted her. "I'm willing to make friends with you. I believe you won't refuse the friendship of an abyssal. It would be ridiculous if there were lies between friends, wouldn't it?" Felicia frowned and looked at him. She stared at him for a few seconds and nodded. "In that case, I'll be straightforward. We came here to hunt for the ice worm, but we didn't expect to meet the ice dragon. We didn't expect that there would be such a terrible thing hidden in the dragon's nest. We wouldn't have accepted this task if we knew about it." "Task?" Dean asked. "You don't know what that thing is." "I've never seen it before." Felicia shook her head. Dean stared at her. It seemed that he wasn't lying, but his acting skills were too good. He continued, "Your intelligence system is quite developed. You actually know about the ice worm, which is thousands of miles away. Where did you get the information?" "The news is from the Legion. We are only responsible for accepting the task. I don't know how the Legion got the information." Felicia shook her head again. Dean slightly frowned. Her words were watertight, and he couldn't figure out more things from them. But at least he knew that the strength of the Bloodthorn Legion was unfathomable. To be able to explore the clues of the ice worm in such a distant abyss, this couldn't be done by ordinary means. "I see that you are much stronger than the average abyss. What level are you?" Dean's eyes lit up. He didn't directly ask about the classification of the abyss, as he didn't want to expose his ignorance. Felicia wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't know if Dean was deliberately blackmailing her, or if he saw that her strength was extraordinary. "You're wrong. I'm just a bit stronger in terms of strength and speed. That's why I look stronger than the average abyss." Dean chuckled. "Really? You can catch up with me even though I'm in the demonic body. It shouldn't be just a bit stronger than the average abyss, right?" Surprised, Felicia looked at him in confusion. "Catch up with you? Don't you remember?" Dudian slowly said. "An ice worm climbed onto your body and took control of you when I rescued you. You showed extraordinary strength at that time. It's not like I haven't seen other abyss experts. I've even fought against them several times, but they're far worse than you." "Iceworm controlled me?" Felicia was shocked. She woke up later, but she couldn't remember how she left the ice lake. She recalled the dark, cage-like place where she was wrapped like a silkworm cocoon. Iceworms swarmed out and surrounded that horrible thing. She believed Dean's words a little bit. She suddenly felt something and wanted to raise her hand, but she held back. Dean saw the change in her eyes. He guessed that she wasn't acting, but didn't remember that she was controlled by the iceworm. He said, "You can touch your left ear. The bloodstains are still there. I don't know if your eardrum has healed or not." She was aware of the slight pain and discomfort in her left ear. She could no longer restrain herself after hearing Dean's words. She raised her hand and gently rubbed it. Soon, she saw the hardened blood on her hand. Her left ear was also a bit strange. There was a constant buzzing sound. At the same time, the warm breeze blew into her left ear. Now, combined with Dean's words and what she saw before she fainted, she immediately knew how Dean saved her. She opened her mouth to ask. Dean said, "The iceworm was cut down by me. It was an emergency, so I didn't have time to pick it up and bring it back. It belongs to you. You won't blame me for losing it, right?" Felicia reluctantly smiled. She felt that Dean's black humor was a bit cold. However, she shuddered when she thought of the scene where the iceworm drilled in her left ear. She felt horrified and disgusted. Even though she had been through hundreds of battles and had seen countless bloody scenes, broken limbs and organs, she felt 100 times stronger when it happened to her. It's always embarrassing when a lie is exposed. "I'm sincerely trying to make friend. I hope Miss Felicia can also open your heart. After all, if I wanted to hurt you, I could have killed you when you were in a coma. Even if you're awake now, you don't have a magic hunter and can't enter the demonic body. I think you're not my opponent. What do you think?" Dean's attitude was still very calm, but his words were cold. Felicia's face slightly changed. It wasn't that she didn't think of a sneak attack when she was awake, but when she was ready to attack, she realized that she was naked. It was a small matter that she had no clothes, but it was a big matter that she had no magic hunter. Her strength would be greatly reduced if she couldn't enter the demonic body. Moreover, there were two of them. She wasn't sure that she could kill Dean in one blow. That was why she endured. She understood Dean's warning. She knew that Dean didn't have the patience to listen to her lies. But confessing was something that only prisoners would do. Was she a prisoner? It seemed so. She had no strength and was at the mercy of others. She was a prisoner. After a long silence, she raised her head and said to Dean, "Benefactor is right. I was confused before. I am indeed slightly stronger than the average abyss. I should be a middle abyss." Middle abyss? Dean's eyebrows slightly raised. "So the captains of your Bloodthorn Corps are middle abyss like you?" Felicia looked at Dean and smiled. "Mr. Dean, you shouldn't be living in the abyss of the kingdom of God, right?" "Oh." Dean's eyes flashed. "Why do you think so? Your dressing, your accent." Felicia smiled. "To be honest, I really admire Mr. Dean. It is very difficult to evolve to the Abyss realm in the Divine Wall. The resources in the Divine Wall are scarce, and the competition is fierce. Benefactor, your father should be a wall master or a big shot in the Divine Wall. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to find out your identity. If Benefactor is sincere, I'm also willing to be your friend. I don't think anyone would reject an Abyss realm friend. If Benefactor is sincere, then I'm willing to be your friend. I don't think anyone would refuse an Abyss friend." Dean glanced at her. He didn't expect that his accent and dress would expose him. It seemed that she had long seen through his identity, but pretended to be stupid. Almost. Dean didn't get angry. "Since you have figured it out, then let's talk about it as we walk. For now, I think there shouldn't be any conflict of interest between us. As for the Ice Lake, there are some people who know about it, including an Abyss." He didn't know if the incident at Ice Lake was a top secret to Felicia, so he purposely reminded her not to try to silence her. It wasn't because he was afraid, but to tell her not to be stupid. Felicia knew what Dean meant, but she felt helpless in her heart. Dean was thinking too much. Although the secret at the bottom of the lake was strange, but it wasn't enough for her to kill him. She would go back to the God's kingdom and report to the army. Maybe she would get a reward for it. Standing up from the grass, Felicia was not shy or bashful. She raised her hand and grabbed some weeds from the side to protect the sensitive parts of her body. She was a bit angry when she thought that her body had been seen by Dean while she was in a coma. Although she had seen a lot of bloody battlefields, it did not mean that she was indifferent to the exposure of her body. She was also a woman, and a very beautiful woman. So she also had the self-esteem that a woman should have. Dean saw her embarrassment. He took out a piece of clothing from his backpack and threw it to her. "There's a wall not far from here. Let's wait until we get there and change into something better." "Okay, is there an upper level above the middle abyss?" Dean asked as he walked. Now that he had seen through his identity, he didn't hide it anymore and asked thirstily. Felicia didn't hide the basic knowledge and explained it to Dean one by one. The abyss was divided into 3 levels: lower, middle, and upper. There was a level above the upper abyss called the Lord of the Abyss. As the name suggested, when one reached this level, he could basically be regarded as half the master of the abyss. Not to mention, crossing the abyss wasn't difficult to flatten half of the abyss, but it would take a lot of energy and time. Dean was surprised, excited, and sighed as he heard Felicia's words. He was excited because he felt that when he evolved to the level of the Lord of the Abyss, he would have power comparable to nuclear weapons. Maybe he could get many mysterious abilities to bring Aisha back from the dead and restore her consciousness. He sighed because the process was too difficult. According to Felicia, the main thing to upgrade the Abyss was the ice worms. To upgrade from the lower abyss to the middle abyss, he needed at least 2 ice worms. From the middle to the upper abyss, he needed 5 ice worms. Felicia didn't know what conditions were needed to reach the level of the Lord of the Abyss. The big shots above the Lord of the Abyss are the 7 kings. At this point, Felicia's beautiful face seemed to be glowing with longing and reverence. That's the peak of the entire holy kingdom, the strongest among all human beings, the limit of life, and the closest to the level of God. Chapter 9:21. Are the 7 kings more powerful than the kings? Dean couldn't help but ask. Phineas chuckled. There is no king in the kingdom of God. All domestic affairs are decided by the Parliament. The 7 kings are the 7 members of the Parliament. They make decisions by voting system. The 7 kings have their own legions. I belong to the Bloodthorn Legion, which was founded by one of the 7 kings. There are countless masters in the Legion. I'm just in the middle. Dean was surprised. He didn't expect that the kingdom of God wasn't a dictatorship. It seemed that the 7 kings were powerful figures. No wonder Phineas respected them so much. Such power was enough to flatten any giant wall. It wouldn't be difficult for them to sweep the abyss. Since the 7 kings are so strong, why don't they expel all the monsters in the abyss? Shouldn't they have the ability to do so? Dean didn't like the 7 kings. Although he didn't want to force the 7 kings, but from Phineas' description, the 7 kings were fully capable of purifying the abyss. Once the abyss was purified, there would be no need for the giant wall. Humans would gather together, and the speed of development would be hundreds of times faster than the current closed stage. Phineas wasn't surprised by Dean's question. Instead, she smiled. You don't know about this. The abyss we are in has been cleared by the 7 kings hundreds of years ago. Otherwise, do you think we can stop the invasion of the monsters by relying on such a strong wall? Some of the monsters are so powerful that you and I can't imagine them. But now, all the monsters that are beyond the defense of the wall have been eliminated by the 7 kings. Even if there are, they are dormant and don't dare to show themselves. Otherwise, they will become the prey of the 7 kings. Dean was startled. How could the abyss be purified? He was puzzled. Since the super monsters have been eliminated, why are there still the monsters of the abyss? Isn't it just a matter of convenience for them? Felicia looked at Dean. This has nothing to do with the 7 kings. Look at the surroundings of the wall. The residents of the wall have cleared the area, but there are still small monsters. The land is boiling with demonic energy. As long as the demonic energy isn't removed, then no matter how many monsters are killed, they will breed again. In the end, the demonic energy is the root of all evil. The demonic energy can't be cut unless the land is completely destroyed and rebuilt. But it's impractical. No one can do this unless they are gods. Dean was startled, but soon understood what she meant. She was referring to the nuclear radiation. Indeed, it was unrealistic to rely on the power of the 7 kings to erase the effects of the nuclear radiation. Even in the old era, it was impossible to remove the nuclear radiation from a piece of land. Moreover, the area of the nuclear radiation was so wide that it covered the whole world. No matter how strong the 7 kings were, it was just the power of their bodies. Dean still felt that the power of science and technology was the ultimate master, even in today's world where the power of life was exaggerated. Technology was equivalent to moving 1,000 pounds with little effort. How much could you move if you had the power of 1,000 pounds? Even so, it shouldn't be difficult to expel the high-level monsters from the abyss by relying on the power of the 7 kings and their legions. Once a year or once every 10 years, the growth of the monsters will be curbed and their power will be limited. In the long run, the monsters will sooner or later become our pets. Perhaps they will become endangered and protected monsters. Dean said. Felicia was stunned, and then she burst into laughter. Endangered and protected monsters? But you're right. If we use all the power of the divine kingdom and sweep the area every few years, we can indeed stop the growth of these monsters. After all, it takes time for the devil chi to nurture the monsters. By then, We might really be able to turn these ferocious monsters into pets for every household. But she shook her head. The kingdom of God is the enemy of the kingdom of God. The border is in chaos all year round. The seven kings have been guarding it all year round. They can't spare any energy to clean up the abyss. It's enough to maintain the current balance here. As long as we don't leave the wall, there won't be any danger. Dean was stunned for a moment, but his eyes flashed. War at the border? Could it be that there are stronger monsters in other areas? Not only monsters, but also some foreign races. Although I haven't been to the battlefield outside the kingdom of God, I have heard some things from my companions. The most troublesome one should be the giant monsters in the south of the kingdom of God. They invade the border all year round. The giant monsters are fierce in nature and have huge physique. They are born with strong brute force and destructive power. I heard that an adult giant monster is comparable to the middle level of the abyss. The stronger ones can even fight with the upper level of the abyss. Moreover, they have strong endurance. They live outside the kingdom of God, so they have strong resistance in all aspects. They can only rely on real swords and spears. Poison, flames, and other means have little effect. Phineas' beautiful face revealed a bit of worry. She was born in the kingdom of God, so she was exposed to all kinds of stories about the foreign races. As she grew up, she became stronger and got a higher position. The more people she came into contact with, the more she heard. She had even seen the giant monsters' corpses that were transported back to the kingdom from the battlefield outside the kingdom of God. She could never forget the huge size of the giant monsters. Dean was confused by Felicia's words. The foreign races? The giant monsters? Was this the enemy that the kingdom of God was facing? Dean was worried when he heard about the existence of the seven kings. The power of the seven kings was enough to pacify the abyss. If there were no monsters in the abyss, then there would be internal trouble. But now it seemed that the kingdom of God was not at the point where it could sit back and relax. There were the foreign races that Phineas mentioned. From the woman's expression, it was obvious that she was not lying. She was worried from the bottom of her heart. This showed that the strength of the foreign races was beyond his imagination. But what were the foreign races? Were they monsters? Or were they the aliens that had invaded the Earth? Or was it something else? Dean suddenly felt confused. The picture of the world that he had believed in was suddenly torn apart. It was not just a crack, but the whole picture was torn apart. According to the picture of the world that Phineas described, the abyss outside the giant wall seemed to be the wilderness of the kingdom of God. The real terrible area was the isolated land outside the border of the kingdom of God. There were powerful foreign races living in that isolated land. Phineas looked at Dean's changing expression. She smiled and didn't say anything. She knew that Dean needed some time to digest these things. She had been in contact with other residents of the giant wall, but they were only at the dominator level. They didn't have the power to cross the abyss and go to the kingdom of God alone. Therefore, their cognition was limited to the level shown by the giant wall. It was like a frog at the bottom of a well. Once it jumped ashore, it saw that the world was more than 10 times bigger than the narrow well. She didn't know what the frog was thinking at that moment, but she knew that people like Dean who hadn't left the giant wall would feel fear, confusion, and even disbelief after hearing these words. She could only give Dean time to digest and accept it. The two walked side by side in silence for a long time. Aisha also silently walked behind Dean. Dean woke up when a jungle lizard suddenly jumped out. He saw Phineas kick the nearly 6-meter-long jungle lizard 20 or 30 meters away. Its skull was broken and it died on the spot. Dean looked at her and saw a beautiful smile. Dean didn't say anything. The jungle lizard that suddenly jumped out was just a small monster. He didn't even need to thank her. He slowly sorted out the previously interrupted thoughts and said, "Are the foreign races monsters or other humans?" Phineas looked at him in surprise. She didn't expect Dean to be so calm. She thought that Dean would suspect that she was lying when she saw Dean's blank and shocked expression. She didn't expect that Dean not only accepted the fact, but also considered the direction that she hadn't considered. Humans? She had never thought that the foreign races were related to humans. But when she heard Dean's words, her heart was moved. But soon she was dispelled by the troll corpses that she saw on the street when she was a child. They were by no means human beings. They had nothing to do with humans. They should be a group of intelligent monsters. Phineas considered her words and said, "It has nothing to do with humans. I said that the 7 kings are the strongest people. No one can be stronger than them. If there is, then they're gods. Don't emphasize the strength of the 7 kings to me. I'm not a member of your legion." Dean shook his head. Looking at Felicia's attitude, it was obvious that her worship of the 7 kings was deep-rooted. He asked a few more questions. After Felicia described the shape of the troll clan, he also cut off the thought of human beings. However, the inexplicable restlessness in his heart didn't settle down. Were the humans in the kingdom of God the last survivors of the world? Would there be similar existences like the kingdom of God in the American continent and the central plains of China? He kept this idea in his heart. He asked Phineas more about the foreign races. Phineas didn't know much. She only told Dean about the names of the foreign races that she had heard. The names of the foreign races had even been woven into fairy tales by the fairy tale writers in the kingdom of God. They had become demons that the warriors of justice had conquered and killed. After talking about the foreign races, Dean talked to Phineas about the kingdom of God. Phineas was very talkative. Soon she outlined a map of the kingdom of God in Dean's mind. Dean couldn't help but sigh. Sometimes things that he couldn't explore were like secrets and fascinating. But for people at that level, it was the most basic knowledge. It was like a street beggar who always fantasized about the sumptuous scene on the dining table of a noble family. But he didn't know that the attention of the nobles would never stay on the dining table. The Lord of the Wall has the title of Earl in the kingdom of God. Above the Earl is the Duke and the Grand Duke. The Grand Duke is either the Lord of the Abyss, the deputy commander of the Bloodthorn Legion, or the rich people who have businesses all over the kingdom of God. These people are the ones who stayed from the ancient era. They keep the traditions of the ancient era. Phineas patiently explained to Dean. Dean listened very seriously. He slowly understood the status of the Wall Lords in the God's kingdom. Earl was regarded as a big figure, but the Wall Lords got the title of Earl. The so-called Earl was sent to manage the God's Wall. They didn't have any real power in the God's kingdom. The word Earl was a nickname used by the nobles in private. Their tone was usually a bit contemptuous. Everyone in the kingdom of God knew that the Lord of the Wall was sent to manage the wall. Although it seemed like the title of Earl, but what kind of place was the wall? Resources were scarce, and the information was blocked. It was like the nursing home of the Abyss. Both of them chatted as they slowly returned to the giant wall where Buck was. "This is the God wall you live in." Felicia looked at the towering wall in front of her, and her eyes flashed as she said with a smile. Dean didn't deny nor agree. He naturally wouldn't expose the giant wall of Sylvia to Felicia, although they had a good talk during this time, but it involved his own privacy. Although Felicia's words opened a new worldview for Dean and helped him a lot, but he felt that it wouldn't take much effort to find out these things when he went to the kingdom of God. Now it was just a little bit earlier. Phineas didn't say much about the secrets. Some of them were things that she didn't know, and some were things that she pretended not to know. "I have something to deal with. Do you want to stay, or?" Dean looked at Felicia. At this point, he didn't need Felicia to answer his questions. He knew what he wanted to know. Felicia didn't give him an answer if he didn't know the answer. "Didn't you say that you also want to go to the kingdom of God? I'll wait for you." Phineas chuckled. Dean nodded. He wasn't worried that Phineas would attack him after going to the kingdom of God. First of all, it wasn't necessary. Secondly, Dean felt that he had great value in the kingdom of God. At least with his conditions, he could join any legion under the command of the king. If his performance was outstanding, he could quickly become a captain. Phineas had invited him to join the Bloodthorn Legion, but he didn't give an immediate answer. Dean climbed over the wall with Aisha. Phineas used both hands and feet to quickly climb the wall. It was more like running. The steep and smooth giant wall was like flat ground under her feet. Chapter 922. I still have something to do. Let's meet here 3 days later. What do you think? Dean didn't plan to bring Felicia into the city. He wanted to sneak into the city, and she would inevitably see something. He felt that he should be able to find out what he wanted in 3 days. After all, Monica was the only abyss in the God's Wall. Felicia was surprised as she didn't expect that Dean would part ways with her so soon. It seemed that Dean didn't want her to know what he was going to do. She was smart and didn't show any curiosity. She naturally replied, "No problem. I'll wait for you here." "All right." Dean turned around and left with Lisa. Felicia's eyes lit up as she looked at Dean's back. He didn't even express his hospitality as a host. It seemed to be a bit rude. Was there something else? Dean walked around the moat after saying goodbye to Felicia. It didn't take long for him to reach the gate of the king's city. There were a lot of people here. From time to time, he could see a large number of refugees. Some of them were ragged. They seemed to have migrated from places that had suffered from war and famine. Some were carriages of nobles and lords. There were also knights who used huge carriages to transport the carcasses of beasts. Dean disguised himself a little and mixed in with the refugees to enter the city. "Get out! Get out! The entrance fee is 10 copper coins." "What? No money? Get out! Get out of here! It stinks! Don't dirty the ground!" Some refugees who didn't have money were stopped by the guards. Some desperate people tried to force their way in, but were kicked away by the guards. They fell to the ground and couldn't get up for a long time. There were also some women who were holding children of 4 or 5 years old. They were crying and begging for mercy. However, the guards didn't sympathize with them. Instead, they looked at them with more disgust and cursed them. Some refugees who had extra money paid the entrance fee to enter the city. They didn't dare to provoke trouble. Dean looked at the refugees who were stopped by the guards. He didn't say anything. He paid the entrance fee for himself and Aisha and went in with the other refugees. "We will starve to death if you don't let us into the city. I beg you. If I let you enter the city, you'll steal everywhere. Sooner or later, you'll be beaten to death. You're going to die sooner or later anyway. Go away now." The sounds of begging and scolding were getting further and further away. Dean walked for a long time in the shadow of the wall. Finally, he came to the street of the king's city. The sun was shining brightly, and the street was full of vitality and noise. Dean looked around when he entered the city. He didn't see anyone at posters or other notices. The reason why he disguised himself was because he was worried that Monica would put him on the wanted list of the entire city. If he entered the city, it would inevitably attract Monica's attention. Although he wasn't afraid of her fighting ability, but if she returned early, she would have enough time to lay a trap to deal with him. Because of this, he did not even look for the noble lord from before, as he was worried that Monica had planted a spy by his side. Let's inquire about her first. If she didn't come back and died outside the giant wall, then it would save a lot of trouble. Dean wandered along the street towards the central area of the city. Dean's powerful hearing allowed him to hear all the conversations around him. Moreover, his brain could automatically process and distinguish the direction of the voices and who was talking. It wasn't just a mess of noises. Dean didn't reach the central area of the king's city. He heard the news about Monica coming from a pub. It seemed that a few thugs who worked for the nobles were talking about Baker. According to them, Baker's whereabouts were unknown. Some people said that Baker had died outside the giant wall. Some people said that Baker had led Monica and other strong people outside the giant wall to hunt and hadn't returned yet. They talked about some strange actions in the king's city in recent days. For example, a head knight of the palace was removed from his position, a noble was promoted, and so on. Dean stopped and listened for a while. He soon got the answer. Monica had come back and seemed to have taken control of the major forces inside the giant wall. At present, the entire king's city seemed to be calm, but the undercurrent was surging. Dean found out that he had ignored one thing from the conversation between the thugs. That was the power and foundation left by Baker and Horny. These would become obstacles for Monica to rule the king's city. She wanted to guard against him and gather the power of King City to deal with him. But it was likely that she was powerless to do so. No wonder he didn't see a wanted notice at the city entrance. He thought that Monica didn't want to alert him, but now it seemed that she didn't have full control of the King's City army. Perhaps she didn't come back early, but just a little earlier than him. However, as the only abyss left in the King's City, it was beyond his expectation that Monica couldn't use force to rule the wall. Was there another abyss here? Or was there something she was worried about? After thinking for a moment, Dean gradually understood. Monica was different from him. He could use force to rule Sylvia, but that was because he never intended to stay in Sylvia. Sylvia wasn't his only home. He could abandon Sylvia at any time. But Monica couldn't. She was born and raised here. It was likely that she would have to stay in the God's Wall for the rest of her life. Once the messenger of the kingdom of God came to visit her, she wouldn't be able to run away. Although the abyss was strong, but it was like an ant in front of the kingdom of God. Barkle and Aristotle, who were the lords of the abyss and the Great Wall, only needed an edict from the divine kingdom, and they had to pay their respects to the Great Wall. Dean sighed as he thought of this. Although he didn't know if his guess was correct, but there was an 80% chance that it was the case. It was absolutely stupid for Monica to forcibly rule at this time. Once the kingdom of God was aware of it, they would think that she had murdered Barker and usurped the position of Wall Lord. If she continued to act low-key and waited for the messenger of the kingdom of God to come and convey the news of Baker's death, then the kingdom of God would give her the position of the Lord of the Wall because she was the only abyss. As long as one's brain wasn't damaged, they would choose the second option. It was nothing more than a few more years of patience. Monica was in a dilemma. She wanted to endure, but she was worried that Dean wasn't dead and would come back to plunder the rare resources in the God's Wall. Dean shook his head and no longer cared about Monica. His goal was to explore the secrets of the temple. It was incredible for Dean that the temple could sell legendary soul worms at will. Even if there were 3 abyss in the God's Wall, and they worked for the temple at the same time, they wouldn't be so extravagant that they could sell legendary soul worms at will. There must be some secrets. That night, Dean let Aisha stay in a hotel to rest. He sneaked into a large temple. At this time, most of the temple staff were off work, and only a few people were on the night shift. Through X-ray vision and thermal vision, Dean saw that there were 7 or 8 masters hidden in the temple. There was also a master. Such power shocked him. So many masters were gathered in a temple. The strength of the temple was not inferior to any of the demon legion under Horny and others. If the temple had the abyss, it would be the most powerful force in the God's Wall. Thinking of this, Dean became more and more careful. Who could guarantee that Monica was the only abyss master here? He cautiously used all of his abilities to sneak into the inner palace. However, as soon as he stepped into a corridor, the 8 inner desolate experts and the ruler, who were hiding in the dark, suddenly changed their positions and rushed towards him. Exposed, Dean blinked slightly, but sighed in his heart. Chapter 923. Whoosh! A sharp arrow suddenly shot out from the darkness behind him, as fast as lightning. The arrow arrived, and the sound was just heard. No scolding, no greeting. The first shot was a fatal attack, and it was in the most difficult position, the most tricky angle. Dean sighed again, and then suddenly turned his body. The arrow that was shot at his back suddenly appeared in his hand. He threw it in the opposite direction, and the arrow shot into the darkness at a faster speed. Clang! With a block sound, for shadows fell from the corner, surrounding Dean, while the other 4 people were still hiding in the dark, including the ruler, who also stayed in the dark to observe and did not directly show up. "Come out, it's a bit despicable to stab me in the back," Dean said. The few people hiding in the dark slightly frowned, but there were some doubts in their hearts. Dean could detect them, which meant that his perception was not weak. Since he sensed them in advance, why did he still lurk in so recklessly? A few shadows swayed, and 2 people hiding in the dark stepped out, while the other 3 were still watching. They were more confident in their ability to lurk. "Who are you?" "This is the temple. What do you want to do by breaking in at night?" A tall and handsome young man said. His tone was as cold as his face, and there was a hint of arrogance in his tone. "I have a little confusion, and I want to find someone to answer it. If you know, it will save me a lot of trouble." Dean said slowly, "There are so many legendary soul worms in your temple. Where do they come from?" "Umph. It turns out that you want to steal the legendary soul worms. You overestimate yourself." The cold young man showed disdain in his eyes and said, "If you really want to know, there's no harm in telling you. Listen carefully. These legendary soul worms are whoosh." A woman behind Dean suddenly held a sword and attacked like lightning. The moment she pounced on Dean, her body had been deformed like an upright cheetah, and her legs and knees were strangely bent, covered with hair. The sword in her hand melted, and her nails protruded longer than the sword. When she moved, the wind sounded. She was already behind Dean, and her plump chest was almost attached to Dean's back. Similarly, her sharp claws were about to touch the back of Dean's neck. But in the next moment, her body suddenly stopped. She stopped without any warning. Then, a sharp pain came from her chest, followed by pain from all over her body. Her arms, abdomen, thighs, throat, forehead, eyes. She opened her mouth slightly, and the scream of pain got stuck in her throat. After a while, her body fell straight down. When she fell, the bright moonlight shone on the ground, reflecting the shadow on Dean's back, which was full of dense, protruding spikes. The spikes were like the back of a sharp blade. In fact, if Dean wanted to, he could make the spikes on his back richer and sharper than a hedgehog. Impatient people always interrupt others, but that's not good. Dean seemed to be talking to himself, but the faces of the people around him suddenly changed. The person who fell was one of the fastest among them. When a youth distracted Dean's attention with words, he used the fastest speed to sneak attack. Not only did he fail, but he was killed by Dean. This was unbelievable to them. However, the people present were all decisive people, so they quickly reacted and instantly rushed over from 4 directions at the same time. The moment they approached, blood sputtered out. In the shadow of the moonlight, a ferocious and dense black object rushed out of Dean's body in an instant and shrank back in an instant. It was so fast that it seemed like an illusion. However, the people who rushed towards Dean stopped, and their bodies broke piece by piece and fell to the ground. Blood filled the air. Dean looked up at the 3 people hiding in the dark. "It's your turn. Come out and answer my questions. Maybe you can live." The faces of the 3 people in the shadows were deathly pale, including the ruler. They all stood rooted to the ground, feeling their legs go limp and their hearts race. They gritted their teeth and held their breaths. They wanted to turn around and run for their lives. But when they remembered that the woman who had ambushed them had been killed, their rationality restrained their impulses, and they slowly walked out of the shadows. Dean was very satisfied with the 3 people. "I ask, and you answer. The hope of survival is in your own hands. Don't let me know that you are lying." The 3 people trembled slightly and responded in a trembling voice. Dean immediately repeated the previous question. The 3 people looked at each other. The ruler in his early 40s hesitated and slowly said, "We don't know much about this. We only heard that the headquarters has divine power that can incubate a large number of legendary soul worms. As long as there is a legendary soul worm as an egg, many can be incubated. But the cost of incubation is very high, so the fee is relatively high." Incubation? Dean frowned slightly and looked at the 2 people next to him. It seemed that they were not lying. Can parasitic soul worms lay eggs? How come I don't know about this? According to what you said, you can incubate a large number of the same kind of legendary soul worm and create a large number of deified legendary soul worms. The ruler's face turned pale, and he said with a bitter smile, "Yes, sir, I really didn't lie to you. But incubating a large number of soul worms to create deified soul worms is not feasible. Sir may not know, but these hatched legendary soul worms can't be deified. It is said that there's a lot of side effects. Relying on these hatched second-generation legendary soul worms can't become an abyss walker. Reaching my level is already the limit. Can't be deified." Dean raised his eyebrows, but he was even more puzzled. He asked a few more questions, but the ruler's face was full of bitterness. He couldn't say the reason. The 2 inner desolate masters next to him were also nervous, and they couldn't hide the fear in their eyes. Dean guessed that they should not be lying. After thinking about it, he let the three people lead the way. He was ready to observe the temple personally and let the three people take the legendary soul worms. He wanted to verify it personally. The three people did not dare to refuse. According to Dean's instructions, they hurriedly disposed of the bodies on the ground and led the way for Dean. Along the way, they met some patrolling guards, and they took the initiative to ask them to retreat. Under the guidance of the three people, Dean smoothly came to the various research rooms, libraries, and other important places in the temple, as well as the storage of the parasitic soul worms. "Sir, what kind of soul worm do you want?" the ruler carefully asked. "For the time being, I'm not in a hurry. I'll take a look first." Dean was not in a hurry to see the soul worms. First, he rummaged through the research rooms. Some of the top-secret documents locked in a special box were also violently broken by him, and he took them out to read. Chapter 924. As the night deepened, the bright moon was covered by the dark clouds. After the 9 o'clock curfew, the flow of people on the streets of King's City suddenly decreased. Some of the prosperous pubs and small shops also closed their doors, drawing the curtains and closing the doors. The earth was shrouded in shadows. In the research room behind the temple, a faint light from an oil lamp shone on the side of Dean's face, making his expression flicker. The three of them stood next to him carefully. Their faces were full of nervousness. They did not even dare to look around, let alone make the slightest sound. The sound of pages turning came from Dean's fingertips. Under Dean's feet, there were scattered books, all of which were top-secret information that he had already read. Some of the sketches on the information were shocking. Splitting, hatching, origami research. Dean's eyes were full of shock. He wanted to explore the secret of a legendary soul worm, but he did not expect that this thing was related to the origami. He did not expect that there was such a sensational experiment going on inside the giant wall. These experimental information had confirmed his guess. The so-called temple was the Monster Research Institute in Sylvia. It was just that it was wrapped with a layer of mysterious God, but the essence was unchanged. However, the experiment carried out by the Monster Research Institute here was far more terrible than the experiment carried out by the Monster Research Institute in Sylvia. They actually used the origami who guarded the giant wall as experimental materials. Although Dean had never been to the Kingdom of God, but through the comparison of Sylvia, he knew that the origami was inviolable. The Monster Research Institute here was obviously against the rules. It was estimated that these experiments were not even known by the Kingdom of God, or even prohibited by the Kingdom of God. Otherwise, there was no reason for the Monster Research Institute in Sylvia not to study the mysterious origami. They were precious experimental materials that contained infinite secrets. The breeze pushed the dark clouds, and the bright moonlight once again shone on the silent sky of King's City. The pages turned from Dean's fingertips to a new chapter. His eyes slightly shook. Many speculations in his mind slowly connected into a line and became clear. Violating the rules of the origami research, creating a large number of pioneers and even dominators, using the temple to establish faith, using the power of the nobles within the giant wall to control the nobles. The manager of the Monster Research Institute here wants to leave the Kingdom of God. Betrayal, secretly cultivating the strong, vainly trying to master the power of God. Just from the divine power, mentioned repeatedly in the top-secret files, he could feel the surging ambition and desire behind it. Felicia's words were still echoing in his ears. The 7 great kings were the strongest human beings and were the closest to becoming gods. However, even the 7 great kings could not compare to the omnipotent and omniscient God. But once he grasped divine power, he would ascend to the heavens in a single step, surpassing the abyss, king, and directly becoming a god. Is there really a god in this world? There was no doubt that there was no such thing in Dean's knowledge. Therefore, in his eyes, the person at the helm of the temple was a complete lunatic. This divine wall, which he had yet to see a complete map, of appeared clearly in front of him on this night. All the veins and veins, including the blood hidden in the darkness. If God's wall was a beautiful woman, then Dean wouldn't be able to peep into her clothes. But at this moment, he was able to see the bones, blood vessels, and organs under the skin of the beautiful woman. The legendary parasitic soul worm splits and uses the flesh and blood of the origami to form a new independent parasitic soul worm. It inherits the previous ability, but does not need to devour other soul worms of the same kind to help one reach the Dominator realm. All the doubts in Dean's heart were solved. At the same time, he corrected the cognitive error that he had established from Sylvia. According to the top secret files, the deification, in his understanding, was not really deification, but assimilation. After devouring a certain number of soul worms of the same kind, the assimilation could be completed. The assimilated soul worm would be strengthened in all aspects, and at the same time, it would stimulate the hidden power in the genes and obtain new abilities. Completing the assimilation of the magic mark was the first step to becoming a dominator. Sylvia's dragon mother, Wing King, and the others were all stuck at this step. However, the deification defined in the top secret files was the soul worms that they sold. These soul worms were a part of the split from the original body. After being mixed with the origami factor extracted from the flesh and blood of the origami, they obtained a stronger capacity and potential. This also allowed those who bought these soul worms to directly break through to the Dominator realm without buying the same kind of soul worm to devour. However, this was not decided. According to the top secret files, the experiment of deified soul worms was not mature yet. Some of the soul worms were only half deified. They still needed to devour the same kind of soul worms to strengthen themselves and break through the bottleneck of the Dominator realm. According to the experimental records of the top secret files, the experiment of splitting soul worms was extremely complicated and had a high failure rate. However, even so, a parasitic soul worm could still split into hundreds of soul worms. These split soul worms originally did not have the ability to become magic marks. They were like puppets or even a lump of mindless meat. However, after being mixed with the origami factor, these split parts were alive. However, although these alive soul worms had the same appearance and ability as the original soul worms when they were implanted into the magic marks, and they could directly help one become a dominator with sufficient resources, they could not fuse with the polar ice worm. In other words, these deified soul worms could at most reach the level of the Dominator realm. They could not step into the ranks of the Abyss Walker. According to the experiment, the origami factor and the polar ice worm repelled each other and were difficult to fuse. This caused the experiment to fall into a bottleneck. However, according to Dean's recent experiments, the temples seemed to be trying to break this bottleneck. They wanted to find a way to balance the origami factor and the polar ice worm. However, there seemed to be no good direction for now. Dean knew what it meant once the method was found. It meant that the temple would be able to mass-produce the Abyss. If there were enough Abyss, even if the probability was 1 in 10,000, it could give birth to a king or even a god. This might be the ambition of the temple. Clap. Dean closed the file and looked up at the ceiling. He slowly closed his eyes. After a long time, he slowly opened them and sighed in his heart. He said to himself, "It's really, technology changes life." The corner of his mouth twitched. The poor relied on mutation, and the rich relied on technology. It was really true. If the experiment was completed, the temple would take a leap to the peak of the kingdom of God. Even if the temple could not create a large number of Abyss at present, any middle Abyss could flatten this place. However, as long as the experiment made a breakthrough, it would be like a carp turning into a dragon. Even the Lord of the Abyss would have to bow down to it. The three of them heard Dean's words and looked at each other blankly. The Dominator whispered, "Sir, do you have any other orders?" Dean glanced at him. This glance made the three of them have goosebumps all over their bodies. Dean quickly looked away and pondered for a moment. He said, "Tell me about the defense and location of the temple's headquarters." Although the harvest from the temple was plentiful, there were still many fragments of top-secret information. especially the research on origami mentioned, which made him very interested. Through the experiment of the deified soulworm, he thought about the changes in his body. He also had the flesh and blood of origami in his body. Although he did not rely on the special machine in the temple to inject it into his body, it still existed alive. Moreover, it did not seem to have any resonance with his right arm. Fortunately, there was no conflict with the polar ice worm. He didn't know whether his situation was also a kind of deification. If so, his magic marks should be assimilation and deification at the same time, right? But thinking about the danger of the flesh and blood of origami, he would rather not have the power of deification. He had to get rid of it and destroy it from his body. Hearing Dean's words, the three of them suddenly froze. Their faces were full of cold sweat. Tell him the location of the headquarters? And the defensive power? This was the rhythm of preparing to attack the headquarters. If Dean wanted to sneak into the headquarters, how could he let them live in order to prevent them from snitching? The Dominator was in a dilemma. His body was secretly accumulating power. He was ready to fight to the death. Dean glanced at the three of them and said, "What? Are you worried that I will kill you?" "Yes, I did have such a plan. But now I have changed my mind." The three of them, who were extremely nervous, suddenly relaxed and looked at Dean blankly. Dean raised a finger. "I will kill two of you and leave one alive. Although it is a bit risky for me, but I think the one who stays should know the consequences if he goes to the headquarters to snitch. Moreover, you have survived such a big thing. The headquarters may not believe you even if you report to the headquarters. So I will leave the smart one alive. Well, let's see who answers the fastest." The three of them were startled as they heard Dean's words. The only woman, who was in her early 30s, was the fastest to respond. "I know. The headquarters is located in the western suburbs of the King, in the Hagrid district." The other two responded in a hurry. "I know." If Dean had given them time, then they would have kept their mouths shut. Perhaps they could save their lives. But Dean didn't give them time to think, especially when the long-haired woman took the lead to speak. They didn't think about anything else. They just wanted Dean to choose them. At this moment, what they revealed was not their humanity. Humanity was not that cheap. They merely displayed the desire to live that any living creature possessed. Their companions who were defending the temple with them had become enemies, or even enemies, who had taken away their only chance to live. "Elder, choose me. I am stronger than them, and I know more than them. I have been to the headquarters several times. They have only been there 2 or 3 times. They can't compare with me." The middle-aged man in his early 40s said in a hurry. Their eyes flashed with strong unwillingness and resentment. The long-haired woman gritted her teeth. "Elder, I spoke first. I spoke first. Although we haven't been to the headquarters, but we have been to more places than him. Moreover, the headquarters doesn't allow us to move freely. He may not know more than us. I know a minister in the headquarters. I also know several ministers. I know more than them. I also know the underground composition of the headquarters." The middle-aged man was angry as he heard their words. He wanted to continue to talk with Dean. Dean raised his hand and interrupted him. He pointed to the long-haired woman. "You speak first. Let's see who has the most comprehensive information." The long-haired woman heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly spilled out everything she knew. 10 minutes later, Dean asked, after listening to the statements of the three, "Is there anyone who has anything to add?" He looked at the three of them. The meaning was obvious. The three of them were stiff. They slightly opened their mouths, but had nothing to say. Dean sighed. "Then you can go on your way with peace of mind." The eyes of the three of them widened. The middle-aged man angrily said, "Didn't you say puff?" A dark shadow flashed past, and a head flew into the air. The long-haired woman and the middle-aged man with a scar turned and ran away. But 2 sharp blades shot out from Dean's back and penetrated his chest. 3 bodies fell to the ground in the blink of an eye. "It's naive. There are no outsiders here. We'll know if I go back on my words." Dean gently shook his head and stepped over the bodies of the 3 people. It was obviously unwise for him to take risks for the sake of promises. Promises were lies, and the value of lies was to create value for oneself, not to bring risks. This was his understanding along the way. He would only keep his promise to one person and engrave it in his mind. After leaving the temple, Dean looked at the night sky. It was only early in the morning. There were still 4 or 5 hours before dawn. It was enough for him to explore the temple headquarters. Speaking of which, Bakers should know something about the temple. They are jackals of the same lair. They cover up for each other. The temple has brought too many pioneers to the God's Wall. Even Horny and Monica, the two abysses, were born. The families behind them should know the secret of the deified soulworm. So they didn't use the deified soulworm to breed them. Instead, they bred complete soulworms from the beginning. Dean's figure quickly swept through the street and headed for the temple headquarters. As for how long it would take for the matter of this branch to be exposed and how long it would take for it to reach the headquarters, he was too lazy to think about it. Although the temple had given him a big surprise, according to the top-secret information, the temple did not have the ability to create the abysses. Even if they had a trump card, it would most likely be 1 or 2 abysses. If there was only 1, he didn't care. If there were 2, it would just be a little tricky. Besides, he didn't think there would be 2. After all, Baker dared to leave the God's Wall because he was guarding against the temple's rebellion. Whoosh! Dean ran as fast as lightning. The guards patrolling the streets of King City were useless to him. Combined with the information from the 3, Dean quickly found the temple headquarters in the western suburbs and sneaked in through the side fence. Chapter 925. As usual, prayers were ineffective. When Dean sneaked into the 3rd laboratory of the headquarters, more than a dozen figures appeared around him and surrounded him. All of them were pioneer-level masters. There were also 2 dominators with strong heat sources watching coldly in the dark. "Who are you?" one of them shouted coldly. Dean sighed in his heart and looked up. "Fuck you." In the center of the royal city, next to the palace where Barker lived, there was a Grand Duke's mansion. Monica was leaning on her 3-6-meter-wide pink bed. Her slender body looked very petite and lovely. She was wearing orange pajamas, and she was flipping through a book of poems by the poet Welland. This was her favorite poet. She loved romantic poems and elegant words, and she was infatuated with them. She would read a few of them every night before going to bed. There were a lot of troubles in the past few days. At 3 o'clock in the morning, she was still not sleepy. She flipped through the poems, and her restless heart gradually returned to peace. Soon, she put aside all distractions and wholeheartedly enjoyed the romantic and true love story in the poems. However, she had only read half of the poem when she heard the sound of hurried footsteps coming up the stairs. Although there was no knock on the door, it had already pulled her back to reality from that beautiful tranquility. She sighed and frowned. She put the poem book on the bedside table and quietly waited for the door to open. "Knock. Come in." The door opened, and a white-haired butler in a tuxedo, who looked to be in his 70s, lowered his head and slowly stepped into the room. He bowed in the direction of the bed and said, "Miss, I have something urgent to report to you." "Uncle Lon, please go ahead," Monica said softly. She knew that if it was not an emergency, the housekeeper, Uncle Lon, would already be asleep at this time and would not come to find her at all. "I just got a secret report. The headquarters of the temple has sent an emergency request. Someone is attacking. They hope that Miss can send reinforcements." The housekeeper whispered. Monica was slightly stunned. She thought it was something in the palace. She did not expect that it was something in the temple, which had always been low-key, and it was in the headquarters of the temple. Suddenly, a shadow flashed in her heart. Her eyelids twitched slightly. She said, "Someone is attacking the temple? Their military strength is not weak. The temple has accumulated a lot of death warriors over the years, and there are 10 or 20 dominators. Is it the Abyss?" "It should be." The butler nodded as he looked at Monica. "Miss, is it the outsider you mentioned last time?" "It's possible." Monica's eyes flickered slightly. She pondered for a moment before saying, "Send someone to tell the temple that I will immediately bring reinforcements. Tell them to hold on. In addition, immediately activate the defense plan I told you about before. This person's strength is not to be underestimated. Even if Barkle and Horny are here, The three of us together may not be able to defeat him. Previously, she looked down on Dean. But after the ambush against the ice dragon, her original perception had been broken. Moreover, she knew that Dean wasn't alone. He also controlled an abyssal-level corpse king. When the butler heard Monica's words, he immediately understood what she meant. Sending someone to reply was equivalent to giving comfort to the temple. Monica had already abandoned the temple. You're finally back. That old dragon didn't manage to kill you. Monica's gaze was deep as she clenched her fists. She felt a chill in the warm bed. The sky was bright. Aisha was sitting on the bed in a single room in a small hotel in King City. She was wearing a purple veil. Her posture hadn't changed. Dean took off his blood-stained coat and threw it to the corner of the room. At this time, the sound of the door was heard. He opened the door and saw a 14 or 15-year-old girl outside. She looked sleepy and yawned. She was holding a basin of hot water and said with some displeasure, "Guest, the hot water you wanted." "Thank you." Dean threw 2 silver coins into her hand. While the girl was still in a daze, the door was closed. Dean came into the room with hot water. He rubbed his hands with soap and washed them carefully. Then he washed his face and hair. After washing, the water became turbid and dark red in color. If he reached out his hand, there were some minced meat pieces in the water. Aisha, who was sitting on the bed, looked at the basin that Dean used to wash his hands. "Hungry?" Dean saw her reaction and remembered that he hadn't taken her to eat anything since he came to the King's City. He felt ashamed. He went out again, but saw the little girl was still waiting at the door. The girl was surprised as she saw Dean open the door. "What else do you want me to do, sir? How did you know that I was looking for you?" Dean was interested. The girl smiled and pointed to the gap in the door. "I saw that the light was on inside, so I thought that you would have something to do. So I waited here for a while." Her attitude was completely different from before. She casually tipped 2 silver coins to let her know that Dudian was a rich man. If she could do something for Dudian, maybe she would reward him again. Dean sighed with emotion. Who said that the people at the bottom were stupid? They weren't necessarily stupid, but just people. "Prepare 20 steaks for me. Pour this basin of water into the gutter behind the kitchen. Then bring me a basin of hot water," Dean said. The girl was stunned. 20 steaks? What kind of appetite was this? She was once again shocked by Dean's wealth and quickly responded. She took the basin of water from Dean's hand and left. Dean also closed the door and went back to the room. He wasn't worried that the little girl would see the blood in the basin. The sky was slightly bright. The oil lamps in the passage were all extinguished in order to save energy. The light inside was dim, so the color of the water could not be seen. Soon, the steaks and hot water were delivered. Dean didn't let the little girl enter the door. He took the things and went back to the room. He threw her 2 silver coins as a reward for her intelligence. Dean fed 10 steaks to Aisha. He saw that her lower abdomen was bulging and her stomach was full, so he stopped. He picked up the remaining 10 steaks and ate them himself. He had consumed a lot of stamina in this night's continuous battles, so he needed to replenish it in time. I didn't expect that the research on the origami had been carried out to such a depth. They had even obtained advanced experimental equipment, such as microscopes from the ruins of the old era. No wonder the owner of the temple was so ambitious. The more he saw, the more difficult it was to satisfy his heart. Dean muttered to himself. He couldn't help but think of himself. The person who was the most difficult to satisfy was himself. After all, he had seen the prosperity of the old era and even the bright starry sky. But now he was living on the giant wall. It was unbearable. But he knew that if he wasn't imprisoned, perhaps he would slowly get used to it like a frog being boiled in warm water. Life would always inadvertently turn into an unexpected fork, but it was difficult to go back to the right path. Dean sighed. He used a basin of hot water to wash his body again. When his fingers rubbed his skin, his mind involuntarily emerged the picture of the temple's headquarters. The end was doomed when his stealth was exposed. The harvest of the temple's headquarters was greater than he had imagined. He was excited when he saw the advanced experimental equipment from the old era. With these experimental equipment, he could study the cell structure of Aisha. This was the first step to truly understand her. But after reading some of the top-secret information of the temple's headquarters, he was disappointed. He even hated the master of the temple. He was too ambitious. The master not only studied origami, but also undeads. The master of the temple had used the experimental equipment to study the undead's virus and the structure of the undeads. The experiments were extremely detailed. Presumably, the remains of origami were precious experimental materials. Even the king of corpses could be easily cultivated by the temple, but there was no way to control it. Whether it was gender difference, age difference, body integrity difference, and so on, many types of undeads and king of corpses had become the object of the temple's research. But the final results disappointed Dean. He knew that even if he did it himself, there was no way to do better. These experimental equipment could only deeply analyze the structure of the undeads and the virus. The results of the analysis had been completed by the temple for Dean. According to the experimental records of the temple, the virus was a very aggressive germ. It had the infectivity of influenza, but it was not like any influenza germ. The target of its invasion was not only human beings. All life forms would basically surrender in front of the virus. This referred to all, including terrestrial animals, aquatic creatures, and even small parasites and so on. Through the research of the virus, the temple speculated that some of the monsters called the named monsters had parasitic soul worms in their bodies. It was likely to be caused by the virus, and these monsters with parasitic soul worms were caused by the virus. These monsters were equivalent to the undeads among the monsters. However, this conclusion was not completely tenable. There was one point that the temple could not explain. These named monsters were not irrational, fearless, and crazy like the undeads. On the contrary, the intelligence of many named monsters was much higher than that of ordinary monsters. They were extremely cunning. According to the experimental observation of the temple, once infected by the virus, the cells would rapidly mutate, expand, divide, strengthen. When involved in fresh genes, the cells would expand again and divide. This was why the undeads would go crazy when they saw blood and could continue to mutate and grow by eating meat. For them, as long as new cells entered the body, they could enhance their own strength by dividing and strengthening these cells. Some cells would even integrate into the body during the division process, which led to some undeads in the process of evolution and mutation. Some were sickle undeads, some were extremely huge undeads, and there were also undeads with hair like monkeys. The temple had no conclusion about the reason for this, but Dean had some speculations after seeing it. It was likely that the effect of the virus on the cells was not simple division and strengthening, but a deeper recombination of the genetic code. Even he did not know about the changes. These made the original genes of the cells coincide, so it could promote the mutation and change shape of the undeads. At the same time, Dean thought of the experiment conducted by a crazy researcher in the history of a monster research institute in Sylvia. He used humans, monsters, and beasts as fodder to feed the undeads. He found that when the undeads swallowed humans, the form of the undeads changed the fastest, but the speed of strength enhancement was the fastest. When the undeads swallowed monsters, the speed of strength enhancement was faster, and at the same time, the form of the undeads would rapidly change. Relatively speaking, the effect of swallowing beasts was the weakest. Combined with this experiment, Dean had a deeper understanding of the undeads. But this was still not what he wanted. He wanted to see how to remove the virus, how to restore the genes, and restore Aisha's consciousness. He didn't even know whether the memory of the past was still in her mind. He didn't dare to think about it, just like he didn't want to touch the thing he was most afraid of. What made Dean feel a little better was that not all the advanced experimental equipment in the temple could be used. Many of them had long been damaged. He didn't know whether they were broken when they were unearthed or destroyed during the experiment. There were also some experimental equipment that was defined as damaged because of the lack of starting power. He could only repair them if he brought them back to Sylvia. After all, there was no electricity here. Moreover, he couldn't memorize the manufacturing of these experimental equipment in the super chip. He had to follow the knowledge on the chip. And the super chip was in Sylvia, hidden in a secret place that only he knew. He didn't intend to bring these experimental equipment back to Sylvia. First, these equipment could at most let him understand the structure of the undeads and the structure of the virus. It couldn't solve the root cause of Aisha's situation. It was like giving a pair of clearer eyes to see where the wound was. But the surgical knife and the medicine to suture the wound couldn't be made by these experimental equipment. So he would rather not look at it. He didn't want to see things that made him more desperate. He didn't want to see the last hope shattered. He didn't want to carry despair to find a solution that he didn't believe in. After all, even if he had all the high-tech equipment from the old era, he had no hope to restore Aisha. This involved a level that even the top medical and biological science of the old era couldn't achieve. Only a breakthrough in science and technology, for example, cracking the technology of the spacecraft with the ice worm in the ice lake, might have hope. After all, it was alien technology. It proved that it was more advanced than the Earth in some aspects. He believed that the technology of these alien spaceships, or even the decrypted technology, definitely existed in the Divine Kingdom. He was even more convinced after learning about the Seven Kings and the Lord of the Deep Caves from Felicia. How could there not be a few alien spaceships in a place where so many experts gathered? Maybe the Kingdom of God had started this research as early as hundreds of years ago. Chapter 926. In addition to the virus, the temple's research on the origami also gave Dean a lot of harvest. The origami factor contained rich energy. It could heal dying people in a short period of time. It could also be used on plants. It could revive withered flowers and willows. Even plants could thrive. If a small amount was added to the human body, it could prolong a person's life. For example, the Divine Temple experimented on a dying old man. Not long after, the old man went from bedridden to walking, and he could even carry out simple soldier training. His physique was better than that of an ordinary man in the prime of his life, and he lived for more than 20 years before aging again. However, after the second injection of the origami factor, the old man stood up once more. However, in less than 2 years, his condition deteriorated again, and the effect was far inferior to the first injection. Even so, this was still a medical miracle. There was no doubt that the origami factor would greatly change the entire human world if it was used in medicine. It would also become the darling of the nobles and the rich. This was the value of the origami factor. For a strong person like Dean, the origami factor was far more valuable than the achievements in medicine. The temple found that the origami factor could stimulate the magic marks and stimulate the potential of the magic marks. There was a chance to give birth to new abilities. Under normal circumstances, the magic marks will be further strengthened when the human body evolves and transforms. It would further integrate with the human body and add more abilities. However, the origami factor could make the magic marks evolve without any changes in the body. This was a priceless treasure for any hunter. This method was called divine sense. Although the divine sense was precious and rare, but the risk was relatively high. The temple had experimented with this method successfully, but there were more cases of failure. 50 years ago, the success rate was less than 20%. Now, it was improved a lot, but the success rate was still only 70%. It seemed that the chance was relatively high, but even 90% success rate would be terrifying if the chance was to gamble with one's life. In addition to the divine sense function, it could also be attached to the Demon Hunter tool. After the Demon Hunter tool was activated, the origami factor in the Demon Hunter tool would strengthen the Demon Hunter tool. The success rate of this experiment was relatively high, and the risk was not high. If it failed, it could be replaced with another Demon Hunter tool. However, for most of the warriors who were short of money, it was also a risk. This method was called deification of the magic tool. The deification of the magic tool didn't limit the growth of the soldiers. It didn't conflict with the ice worm. Most of the soldiers chose this method. At first, Dean thought that his situation should belong to the former divine sense. However, after a detailed comparison of the experiment, he found that it was not the case. The divine sense only used a very small amount of origami factor to complete the divine sense experiment. The origami factor extracted from a piece of origami the size of a fingernail was enough to complete the divine sense experiment of hundreds of soldiers. The origami's flesh in Dean's body was much bigger than the size of a fingernail. Moreover, it was not injected into the body but directly swallowed into the stomach and intestines. This situation was not an isolated case. The ambitious Pantheon had also conducted experiments on consuming the flesh and blood of the origami. The subjects of the experiments included monsters, beasts, and other types of creatures. Some of them died after taking the origami's flesh. Some of them had a mutation and turned into a monster. Although their body didn't change, they awakened super high intelligence and almost escaped from prison. There were all kinds of situations, but none of them were like Dean. He didn't awaken extremely high intelligence, nor did his body mutate. He even wondered if he was the kind of person who had awakened extremely high intelligence. But because his intelligence was already very high, there was no effect. Soon he rejected this narcissistic idea. He felt that he was slightly smarter than the average person, but compared with a real wise person, he was far behind. He understood human nature. The wise man understood the mysteries of the universe. There were countless great scientists that were born in the history. Any one of them could kill his intelligence in seconds. Speaking of which, he could not help but thank his right arm. Back then, his right arm had been frozen by a freak combination of factors. That was how he managed to survive the ordeal. Before this, he did not know what would happen if the origami's flesh and blood entered his brain. However, after reading the experiment records of the Temple of Light, he knew what would happen. It was very likely that he would awaken superintelligence. However, rather than saying that it was an awakening, it would be more accurate to say that his original thoughts were being consumed. Just like those humans, demons, and beasts who had awakened their intelligence, all of them showed a change in thinking that they had never experienced before. Using a phrase mentioned in the experiment records, it was as if they had completely changed their brains. Yes, perhaps they had changed their brains. This made Dean more vigilant about the origami's flesh and blood. Although it was silent now, he didn't dare to relax his vigilance. This thing, it was very likely to contain thinking. He could see one or two things from his previous attacks. Every piece of the origami's flesh and blood contains independent thinking. If this is 100% true and not just speculation, then what is the origami? Dean thought about the perfect face and ugly body of the origami. He secretly sighed in his heart. These things were probably the most terrible things on Earth. It wasn't easy for humans to survive after the disaster, but they were living together with such things and were even sheltered by them. He shuddered at the thought of it. The sky was completely bright. Dean left the blood-stained clothes in the room and put on a new set of cotton clothes. He went out of the hotel with Aisha and paid for the room. Then he went out and hired a carriage. They went straight out of the king's city. The carriage drove along the road. There were shops, pubs, and people gathered on the roadside or in the square. Dean soon heard some of the discussions about the temple. It seemed that the news of him breaking into a branch of the temple and slaughtering half of the headquarters had spread. The status of the temple in the giant wall was supreme. It was comparable to the royal power. Overnight, such a big thing happened. At this time, the temple was already under pressure. It was estimated that they didn't have time to pay attention to the news. Most of the conversations were about the temple. However, the people were still the people. They only talked about the attack and so on. They didn't know the specific casualties. Obviously, there were some blockades in the scene. Dean estimated that Monica already knew about it, but he had done what he had to do. There was no point in staying. As for the experimental equipment and other things in the temple, he felt that sooner or later he would have the opportunity to come back to get them. Maybe he would get better equipment in the kingdom of God. But the premise was that he could get in touch with the core circle of the kingdom of God. The carriage drove out of the king's city. Dean handed the coachman 10 silver notes of the lowest denomination and turned away with Aisha. It didn't take long before he was ready to enter the outskirts where there were wild beasts. Suddenly, he heard the sound of hooves coming from behind. He looked back and saw that the coachman was chasing after him. Dudian waited for the carriage to stop in front of him. Then he stopped. The coachman sat in the carriage and smiled at Dean. "Mister, do you want to go back and forth? I'll pick you up here." Dean suddenly thought of the little girl who was guarding outside his door. He shook his head. "No, you go back." The coachman was disappointed. "Mister, do you want to go forward? It's dangerous there. I'm familiar with the road. Do you want me to send you? Didn't you just send me outside the city gate? You must be joking. I was afraid to dirty the horse's hooves and wheels. Mister is so generous, so I should send you." Dean shook his head. "No need. You can go." The coachman's face slightly changed. He sighed. "Well, since Mister is so stubborn, then don't blame me." As soon as he finished speaking, the hand that he had been hiding on the other side suddenly flung out, and in it was a short dagger. Dean also sighed. At first, he thought that the coachman was the same as the little girl, trying to earn more money by being attentive. But later he realized that the coachman was not only greedy, but also cruel. He seemed to have lost all interest. His eyes moved away from the coachman as if he didn't even see the dagger that was stabbing towards him. He turned around and led Aisha to continue moving forward. Hiss! The horse neighed and raised its hooves as if it was frightened. Dean took Aisha further and further away. The coachman softly leaned against the carriage. His head rolled into his arms. Blood gushed out from the neck. Only the horse kept neighing and kicking its hooves. The coachman was concerned that this place was close to the city gate. But Dean didn't care. Dean and Aisha quickly moved forward after arriving in the wilderness. It didn't take long for them to reach a forest in a remote area. The leaves in the forest were lush, so the humidity was heavy and the sunlight was sparse. Poisonous snakes and beasts were entrenched in the forest. Brightly patterned snakes could be seen swimming on the trees. Dean came to a more open place, picked up a handful of small stones from the ground, and shot them out. Swishing sounds and the sound of leaves being penetrated echoed. One after another, poisonous snakes fell from the trees, grass, and entrenched bark, twitching powerlessly. In addition, there was an unknown black-haired beast that was 1/2 meter long in the grass. Dean found a stone and sat down after cleaning up the surrounding beasts and poisonous insects. He took out the ice worm that he had dug out from the head of the ice dragon from his backpack. Dean knew how to absorb the ice worm after Felicia's explanation combined with the information from the temple. It's a pity that I didn't take away the one that was wrapped around Felicia's neck. Dean sighed in regret. If it wasn't for the urgent situation at that time, he would have been able to evolve into the middle abyss in one fell swoop. The gap between the middle abyss and the lower abyss was no different from the gap between the abyss and the Dominator. It could be seen from the fact that Felicia could catch up with him without using her demonic body. Dean started to absorb the ice worm according to the steps after taking it out. At noon, the sun was high in the sky, and the temperature in the woods had risen a bit. Dean was moving around in the dense forest. His figure jumped between the trees like a phantom, and the sound of the wind was heard, and the leaves were blown askew. After a while, Dean returned to his backpack. There was some doubt in his eyes. After absorbing the ice worm, he felt that his physical strength had increased by less than 1/5. The effect was much lower than he had expected. He thought that his strength would at least double. If he had 2 ice worms, then it would be 4 times stronger. It was in line with the gap between the lower abyss and the middle abyss in his heart. But now it was less than 1/5. Did he have to absorb 2 ice worms to have a qualitative change? Dean couldn't think of an answer. He stayed in the forest until the night and tried again. The result was the same. He could only give up and was going to meet with Felicia and ask her about it. 3 days later, Dean arrived at the appointed place outside King City. However, he did not see any of Felicia's people. He frowned slightly. Did they go back on their words? Not long after, Felicia's figure appeared. She had changed into a clean lady's dress. It was a light green skirt. She looked a bit fresh. She smiled at Dean. "Sorry, I'm late." "It's okay. Women have the right to be late. You are such a gentleman. Don't misunderstand. I was just saying, well, you're a warrior. Dean held Aisha's hand and walked in front. He asked Felicia about the past few days in the King's City. I had a good time these days. I didn't expect that there would be so many interesting things in these remote walls. Speaking of which, I brought you a gift. Felicia handed the gift box to Dean. Dean took it and opened it. It was a furry bear with a pink bow. His mouth twitched. He returned the gift box. I don't need it. It's not for you, Felicia said with interest. Dean was speechless. He suddenly found that Felicia wasn't dressed like a lady. Felicia covered her mouth and laughed. You can give it to your girlfriend if you don't want it. Maybe she will like it. Dean raised his eyebrows. I'll choose the gift she likes. You should keep this for yourself. After all, the journey in the wilderness is lonely. It's good to have this as a companion. Felicia shrugged. She took the gift as she saw that Dean didn't want it. It didn't take long for Dean to ask her about the absorption of the ice worm. He told her about the absorption method and the effects of the ice worm. Felicia had long noticed that Dean had an ice worm in his backpack, so she wasn't surprised. But she was surprised when she heard about the effect of the ice worm. It shouldn't be. Generally speaking, the power should be doubled. You're just a low abyss, not a middle abyss. Wait, are you? Suddenly, she looked at Dean in astonishment. Dean froze for a moment when he heard her words, but he reacted in an instant. His mind was sharp, and he was suddenly shocked. He remembered that the requirement to advance from a middle abyss to the upper abyss was 5 ice worms. Could it be that he had unknowingly become a middle abyss? But he had only used 1 extreme ice worm. He frowned as he thought of the origami's flesh. Felicia glanced at Dadian and said, It's normal for a middle-level abyss like you to have such an effect. I said that with your strength. How could you be a low-level abyss? You lied to me before, but now you've exposed yourself. Dean was speechless, but he didn't explain anything. Instead, he was glad that he didn't tell her too much about himself. If she knew that he had such power with only 1 ice worm, then it was hard to guarantee that she wouldn't think too much. Dean didn't talk to her about this. He continued to talk about the trip to King's City. After reaching the giant wall, Dean used the sun to determine the direction and continued to move forward. Felicia followed Dean for 7 or 8 miles. She looked at Dean suspiciously. Do you have something to do in the vicinity? Dadian was surprised. Nothing. Felicia was stunned as well. She widened her eyes and said in shock, You don't know where the God Kingdom is? Dean looked at her expression and responded, Did I go the wrong way? Chapter 9:27. This was very awkward. Dean coughed twice. He was used to traveling alone. He didn't think that he had a navigator by his side. Can you tell me the location and distance of the Kingdom of God? Dean looked at the woods in front of him and asked in a serious tone. Looking at his side profile, Felicia covered her mouth and chuckled. After laughing for a while, she said, You're lucky to have met me. Otherwise, you would be in big trouble if you followed this path all the way to the end. What do you mean? Dean turned to look at her. It seemed that he had forgotten the previous embarrassment. Felicia chuckled. This is the opposite of the kingdom of God. You are getting further and further away from the kingdom of God. Where do you think you will go if you continue to move forward? Isn't this bad luck? Dean's eyes moved. You mean, is this the place you mentioned outside the border? Of course. Dean pondered for a moment. He had considered such a result when he came out from Sylvia. But in his opinion, even if he couldn't find the kingdom of God, he would find other giant walls sooner or later. Even if he didn't touch other giant walls, he would be able to see a new world. Perhaps he would be able to see the place outside the kingdom of God. This was the reason why he didn't choose to go in circles. After all, the earth was round. Isolated place outside the border. Dean thought of the troll clan that Felicia mentioned. His heart was full of expectation and excitement. You said that this place is remote. How far is it from the kingdom of God? How far is it from the border? Felicia looked at him in surprise. Do you want to go outside the border? I advise you to give up on this idea. This is the east side of the God Nation. I heard you say that the south side of the God Nation has the giant devil race, the east side has the fire dragon race, and the north side has the snow ape race. Although I have never seen the fire dragon race in the east side, I heard that they're even more terrifying than the giant devil race in the south. With our strength, although it is not bad here, if we meet the fire dragon race, we will definitely die. Dadian shook his head. Tell me the location of the kingdom of God. I may not go there. Seeing that Roland still had not given up on the idea, Felicia frowned. She picked up a dry twig and walked to a place where the soil was relatively soft. Using the twig as a pen, she drew a huge circle on the ground and poked a small hole in the west of the center of the circle. This is the Holy Kingdom, and where we are. The tip of the branch drew to the east, where it was close to the giant circle, and poked a small hole. This is probably where we are. It's quite far from the God's kingdom, and it belongs to the border area, close to the isolated land. Dean stared at the circle. What is the distance in the middle? I don't know either, but it will take me a month to get here from the Divine Kingdom, and this is a smooth journey with the strength of the Abyss Squad. If I were alone, it would probably take me more than 3 months to get here. Felicia looked at him. Although we are close to the isolated land, but the closer we are to the border, the more remote it will be. The number of monsters in these remote areas are denser, and many of them are high-level monsters. So it will take at least half a month to get to the border from here. Dean nodded. He had a general understanding of the location of Sylvia on the map. He didn't expect that the weak Sylvia would be closer to the God's Kingdom. If he had chosen the right direction, then perhaps he would have reached the God's Kingdom by now. Do you know the coordinates of the other walls? Dean asked again. Felicia shook her head. The map we got doesn't contain the coordinates of the God's Wall. We only have the marks of the Devil's Pit. After all, our strength is enough to destroy the God's Wall if we go to it. Some people go out to perform tasks and loot the God's Wall. Anyway, no one can trace them after they leave without leaving any traces. However, the God's Kingdom has a strict ban in this area. If someone from the Abyss is found to have infiltrated the God's Wall, they will receive the most severe punishment. Not all the Abyss can guarantee that they won't leave any traces. After all, once the news is leaked, the Abyss will send people to investigate. No one knows what kind of perception ability the Abyss has. It is said that some of the Abyss's perception ability can detect you even if you are not close to the God's Wall. Dadian was startled, as he didn't think that there would be such a rule, but it was reasonable. Otherwise, the Kingdom of God wouldn't know what happened to the wall in the current communication environment. It would take a decade and a half for the Kingdom of God to find out. Are you not interested in the God's Kingdom? Dean looked at her. Not interested. She stared at Dean. It's not a joke. Countless warriors of the God's Kingdom are sacrificed outside the God's Kingdom every year. It's common for the Abyss to fall. Even the Abyss's Lord will fall outside the God's Kingdom. If I have a choice, I don't want to get close to the God's Kingdom in my life, let alone step outside the God's Kingdom. There's nothing to see there. I'm not that curious. You should know that curiosity often kills people. Dean didn't expect her to be such a conservative person, but it wasn't that she didn't have adventurous spirit. Perhaps she had lived in the God's Kingdom since childhood. That's why she didn't want to get close to the God's Kingdom. But for him, he had a strong curiosity about the God's Kingdom. He was like a child living inside the God's Kingdom. He was eager to see the scenery outside the God's Kingdom. He wanted to see what the earth of the past had become now. Can you tell me about the East? Dean asked. Felicia didn't expect Dean to be so persistent. She sighed. As your friend, I sincerely hope that you can dispel this terrible idea. But it seems that I can't persuade you with just a few words. I'll tell you what I know so that you can think about it. Thank you. Dadian nodded. His tone was somewhat sincere. Felicia shook her head and pointed at the huge circle on the ground with a twig. Other than the fire dragons, there are also many powerful monsters in the east of the border. Therefore, the soldiers stationed at the border have to defend against the invasion of the fire dragons and the monsters of the border. Therefore, the security here is very tight. Without the permission of the 7 kings of the Kingdom of God, no one can cross the border. Unless you and I have the power of the 7 kings or the Lord of the Abyss, it's possible to cross the border. But once we cross the border, it won't be easy to come back. Dean was startled. His brows wrinkled. The obsession in his heart suddenly dissipated. Although he was eager to see the world outside the god's kingdom, but what Felicia said was right. It wasn't just an adventure. Going out was a big problem. As for coming back, it was even more dangerous. Moreover, he couldn't guarantee that if he was lucky enough to come back and meet Felicia again in the god's kingdom, she wouldn't sell him out. Felicia saw that Dean's face was gloomy, so she continued, "There are many monsters on both sides of the border. Even if you don't get killed by the monsters, you'll be arrested by the border guards. You'll be sentenced to death on the spot. Even I will be considered a felony if I get close to the border without the order of the Seven Kings. I'll be stripped of my position and demoted to a pariah." Dean was silent. The border issue was not a trivial matter. Especially the Seven Kings couldn't deal with the monsters outside the god's kingdom. "Okay." Dean exhaled a breath. Felicia was relieved. "It's good that you can figure it out. We'll go and have a look. We'll come back when we get close." Dean didn't wait for her to finish her words. He looked at her stunned face and coughed. "Anyway, we are already here. We are so close to the border. There are some things that are always good to know. There's an old saying that there is no harm in seeing more things. Some things are better not to see." Felicia's face was dark. "But we've seen it. Instead of seeing the tip of the iceberg, it's better to see the whole picture. At least we'll have a clear idea," Dean said. Felicia raised her eyebrows. "Clear idea? What do you want to do?" Dean knew that he was speechless, but didn't panic. "What can I do? Didn't you say that you were going to introduce me to the Bloodthorn Legion? I guess with my ability, even if I don't join the Bloodthorn Legion sooner or later, I will be noticed by the higher-ups. Maybe one day they will send me to the border. It's better to understand now so that I don't have to worry about the future. You're thinking too much. The higher-ups will give you a detailed introduction." Felicia immediately said. Dean saw that he couldn't persuade her. "Anyway, I'm going to have a look. Do you want to go?" "You're a rogue," Felicia said bitterly. Dean shrugged. "Well, I'll go with you." Felicia sighed. She knew that she had no other choice. Although she got along well with Dean, and they seemed to have become friends, but she knew that Dean wouldn't let her go so easily. The reason why Dean was determined to go was to test her attitude. She knew that Dean's big secret was that he could control the Corpse King. Although she didn't show anything unusual about this matter because she was afraid of attracting Dean's attention, but she knew that even if she was blind, Dean would still be suspicious of her or even kill her. "Then go." Dean had an expression that said, "This is what you agreed to." He turned around and walked away. Felicia smiled slightly. She suddenly doubted whether she was mistaken. Perhaps if she said that she could separate now, could she really get away? She shook her head, threw away the branch, and followed behind Dean. As the two of them got farther and farther away from the wall, the number of monsters they encountered along the way gradually increased. From time to time, monsters above level 200 would jump out from the ground or the darkness of the bushes to attack them. If it was in the past, when he just left Sylvia, Dean would inevitably be in a hurry to deal with them. He would even have to turn around to escape. But now he could kill them without any effort. The longer he walked, the more he realized the meaning of the name Abyss Walker. It was too vivid. Now, he could completely keep moving in a straight line. Even if he encountered abyss-level monsters along the way, he didn't need to be afraid. It seemed that the dangerous abyss was just a suburban wilderness under his feet, and he was a veteran hunter who had experienced hundreds of battles. Time passed quickly. Puff! Blood bloomed. A monster snake that was nearly 100 meters long fell to the ground softly. Its back was covered with fine scales, like a snake or an alligator. Its tail was forked. At this moment, one of the snake's heads was smashed, and it lost its life. Felicia's figure lightly jumped over and cut open the strange snake's stomach. After a while, she took out a small worm and collected it into the special soul worm jar that Dean gave her. The parasitic soul worm would die in a short time after leaving the host, but it could survive in this special soul worm jar for 1 or 2 months. 3-star legendary monster, Rock Soul Worm. Felicia handed the special soul worm jar to Dean and smiled. "I didn't expect our luck to be so good. We met 2 legendary monsters in just 2 days." Dean took the jar and threw it into his backpack. Now the legendary parasitic soul worm was no longer attractive to him. From Felicia and the temple's information, he knew that the way to become stronger in the abyss mainly depended on the ice worm and the help of other drugs. For example, some drugs could stimulate the body, increase strength in a short time, or harden the skin, but these drugs had certain side effects. There were also some drugs that could permanently increase the strength of a human body, but it was good enough to increase the strength by 10%. These drugs were very expensive, and they were priceless treasures in the kingdom of God. For an abyss like Dean, the parasitic soul worm had lost its value. After injecting it, it had no effect. It could only be used to train subordinates, give it to relatives, sell it as currency, and so on. Moreover, this parasitic soul worm was only a 3-star legendary monster. According to Felicia, legendary monsters were divided into 5 values, from 1 star to 5 stars. 5 stars was the rarest. For example, the Dream Breeder that Dean knew was a 5-star legendary monster. The Supplicant was a 4-star legendary monster, and the Splitter was only a 3-star legendary monster. However, according to Felicia, the Splitter was a relatively precious existence among the 3-star legendary monsters. It was ranked at the top, far from the Rock Soul Worm, which was an ordinary 3-star legendary monster. Chapter 928. According to Felicia, Splitter was classified as a 3-star legendary monster because of its attack power. Otherwise, it would only be a 1-star legendary monster. Dean didn't pay attention to Felicia's words. He knew in his heart whether he was strong or not. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Dean and Felicia kept moving forward. Except for resting at night, they kept moving at high speed during the day. They didn't stop even when they passed through the territory of the monsters from the abyss. As long as they didn't step into the devil's pit, they were almost unimpeded in the ordinary abyss area. Let's stop here. After eating half of the barbecue in her hand, Felicia turned to look at Dean. We're going to reach the border. You have seen that the number of monsters we met yesterday and the day before yesterday is getting more and more. They are getting stronger and stronger. If we continue like this, we will soon touch the border. It's not too late to turn back now. You have seen what you want to see. Dean ate the barbecue in his hand, stood up, and pointed to a mountain in front of them. We should be able to overlook the border from there, if we are close enough to the border. Felicia glanced at him, but didn't say anything. They quickly finished their food and continued their journey. In less than an hour, they arrived at the mountain that Dean wanted. They left a lot of monster corpses at the foot of the mountain. Felicia said, while climbing the mountain, "There are so many monsters living on this mountain. It is estimated that it is the territory of a big monster. Be careful. Even if it is the abyss, the 2 of us are enough to kill it." Dean quickly climbed up and soon reached the top of the mountain. He didn't see the predicted monster lord. The air at the top of the mountain was particularly fresh. Dean looked up at the clouds and said, "You said that thunderbirds are birds raised by the kingdom of God? There should be a lot of them living in the clouds near the border, right?" Dean chatted with Felicia on the way. He learned that the frightening thunderbirds were war monsters raised by the kingdom of God. They were spread all over the abyss. Many dominators in the abyss who had the ability to fly were afraid of them. Even the Lord of the Abyss didn't dare to provoke large flocks of thunderbirds. Thunderbirds lived in the clouds. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were the overlords of the sky. They lived in groups. When a group of thunderbirds concentrated their power, it was no less than a thunderbolt. This kind of war-type demonic beast was extremely effective in air defense. Felicia nodded. There are a lot of thunderbirds at the border. Thunderbirds are rare in the clouds and the abyss, and most of them are free-range. But it's different here. Even the Lord of the Deep Abyss will be killed instantly by the thunderbirds. As for people like us, we'll be turned into ashes instantly, even if there are 8 or 10 of us. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm telling the truth. Of course, I believe what you said is true. Dean had a deeper understanding of the power of lightning. However, although lightning was strong, there were ways to restrain it. Insulator materials and conductive devices were the nemesis of Thunderbirds. He suspected that the Seven Kings had used technological means to enslave these Thunderbirds and drive them into their own weapons of war. He suddenly had a bold idea. It would cost a lot to build a power station in Sylvia, but it wouldn't bring much electricity. The national grid in the old era was dominated by nuclear power plants. Wind power, water power, and solar power couldn't be compared. However, the cost of building a power station was small, but it occupied a large area. This was nothing in the old era. After all, although there were many people in the old era, the whole world was human territory. There were vast lands for human use. But in today's world, the area inside the giant wall was limited, and resources were also limited. In addition, the sky was covered with thick nuclear dust, and the light was thin. The most cost-effective solar power station wasn't effective, so they could only rely on wind and water power. However, these two were barely effective inside the giant wall. After all, the giant wall was thousands of meters high. The wind inside the giant wall wouldn't be strong, and most of the time there wouldn't be any wind. So the efficiency of the wind power station was very low. The same was true for hydropower. The water inside the giant wall was limited. It was enough to provide food and water for people, and part of the water could be taken out for recycling. At most, 5 or 10 small and medium-sized hydropower stations could be built. Moreover, the land inside the giant wall was limited. If he wanted to build in large quantities, he would have to compress the living area of the residents. These are the most basic limitations. Other materials, manpower, and other aspects made it difficult for Dean to mass-produce power stations at this stage. Therefore, the electricity generated at the beginning was not enough to electrocute an abyss. As for where to get power, it seemed to be an excellent power treasure house in front of him. He suddenly felt that he was really stupid before. He couldn't see the wealth in front of him. It was probably because of ignorance. What are you thinking about? Felicia saw a trace of excitement in Dean's eyes. There was a bad premonition in her heart. She frowned and asked. Dean came back to his senses, and a strange look in his eyes disappeared. He said calmly, "Nothing. I just think that with these Thunderbirds, these aliens won't be able to launch an airstrike. We just need to hold the ground." Felicia nodded. "Yes, but the aliens also have strong flying magic beasts. But compared to our Thunderbirds, they're still too weak. It's not easy to break through the Thunderbirds cultivated by the Seven Kings. Moreover, there are rules in the Kingdom of God. If you capture or hurt Thunderbirds without authorization, you will be punished with treason. Thunderbirds are the war magic beasts of our Kingdom of God. They are also the guardian of the kingdom." Dean raised his eyebrows. "What if the Thunderbirds attack us first? We can't hurt them. Anyway, it's a capital crime," Felicia said without thinking. Dean didn't say anything, but was looking forward to it. He used his X-ray vision to look forward. His line of sight penetrated through layers of void. Countless dust was peeled off from his line of sight. In a distant place in the sky, there was a gray, giant shadow standing. He could only vaguely see a huge silhouette. It seemed to be something similar to a giant wall, but it towered into the clouds. Its height made people look up to it. "That's the border defense wall." Felicia pointed to the direction Dean was looking at. "With your eyesight, you should be able to barely see a shadow. This God of War wall is tens of thousands of feet high and completely isolates the border. Countless aliens and strange beasts have crashed into the God of War wall and died, but they couldn't shake the God of War wall. This is the protection given to us by God. Only God can create such a great miracle." Dean's eyes slightly moved. Although he had heard her description before, he was still shocked to see the gray, giant shadow with his own eyes. The God of War wall had one more word than the God of War wall, but the height difference was like heaven and earth. It was 3,300 meters high, more than 3 times the height of the God of War wall. To build such a giant wall in a land full of monsters and aliens, it was not an exaggeration to say that it was a miracle. Such a project was not something that humans could create. Moreover, this God of War wall surrounded the entire kingdom of God. Its area was vast, and its length alone was comparable to the Great Wall of China, which had 5,000 years of civilization. In the old era, the role of the Great Wall to China was equivalent to the role of the god of war Wall in the era of monsters. The height of tens of thousands of feet was enough to isolate most of the impact of the beast tide on the land. How many corpses would be piled up to climb up this giant wall? Moreover, there was a group of thunderbirds lurking in the clouds. The top and bottom of the wall were impregnable. Perhaps the guy who created this god of war wall can really be called a god. Dudian thought in his heart. At this moment, he didn't despise the superstition of the people who believed in the gods. Anyone who saw such a majestic building and a miracle that was difficult to achieve would believe in the existence of the gods. It seemed that the role of the wall was to tell the world that the gods existed and they were the things left by the gods. The god of war wall is so high. How could those aliens break through the border? Dean thought of what Felicia had said about the countless casualties at the border. He had a clearer impression of the aliens outside the border. Felicia nodded and sighed. The strength of the alien races is far beyond our imagination. Since young, I have heard from my elders that although the alien races are unable to destroy the god of war wall, their monstrous strength makes it hard to defend against them. For example, the giant demon alien race is adept at climbing. Although the god of war wall is steep, it is like a flat ground to them. In the end, the warriors on the wall have to resist. Dee nodded. For some monsters, there was no difference between the height of 1 kilometer and 3,000 meters. Have you seen enough? Let's go. All right. Dean glanced at the gray shadow of the wall. He turned around and went down the mountain with Felicia. Hiss. At this moment, a black shadow was galloping through the clouds in the distance. Dean and Felicia stopped to look. The black shadow was flying very fast. In the blink of an eye, it was above their heads. Felicia exclaimed, "Purple-winged dragon. Is it a border envoy?" Dean also saw that the black shadow was a dragon. However, it was different from the one he had seen in Sylvia. That one seemed to be light yellow, but this one was purple-black. Its physique was also bigger. After knowing that thunderbirds were war beasts raised by the kingdom of God, he also understood the real reason why thunderbirds didn't attack dragons. They were the henchmen of the same boss, so they didn't dare to fight each other. As the two looked up, the purple-winged dragon suddenly swooped down. Its body circled and turned back. Dean and Felicia's faces changed. Soon, the purple-winged dragon turned around and flew straight toward the two of them. The strong wind from the dragon's wings blew the trees in the mountain. All the trees bent down as if they were subservient subjects. Dean knew that it was too late to escape, so he stood still with Felicia. Looking at the purple-winged dragon from a close distance, Dean suddenly felt that the Arctic dragon he had met before was just like this. The latter's size was even a size smaller. At this time, Dean also saw 3 figures standing on the dragon's head. They were wearing strange clothes. One of them was wearing a scarlet cloak that was fluttering in the wind, making a trembling sound. 2 men and a woman, all in their 30s. They exuded a powerful aura, but they didn't emit any heat fluctuations. This was the reason why Dean didn't notice them at first. Dean knew that it wasn't only cold-blooded magic marks that could hide the heat source. There were many secret books in the kingdom of God, such as the dragon blood technique of the demon dragon clan, which could control the blood and hide the heat source. 2 abysses? This is the Corpse King? The 3 glanced at each other and saw the strength of Dean and Felicia. This made Dean's heart sink. He had hidden the heat source, so did Felicia. Moreover, the 3 saw Aisha, which made him feel a bit of crisis. "Which god's wall are you from?" asked a mature youth who was holding a giant sword. He had a buzz cut, and his eyes were full of sharpness. His voice was very calm. Dean didn't open his mouth as he saw Felicia's eyes. He closed his mouth. Felicia stepped forward and said, "3 sirs, I'm the captain of the 5th squad of the Bloodthorn Legion, Felicia. I was carrying out a mission here, but something happened and I lost my medal. This is my blood mark." She rolled up her sleeve. There was a blood-red tattoo on her arm. It was a thorny flower with poisonous thorns. The three saw her blood mark, and the coldness in their eyes faded a lot. The tall woman on the left softly said, "What's the matter with the Corpse King? Why didn't it attack you?" Dean bowed his head and said, "Three sirs, we met the Corpse King when we were carrying out a mission. We used a special method to stop its ability to move. We're going to bring it back to the kingdom of God." Felicia turned to look at Dean. There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. She was ready to betray Dean once he was exposed. She didn't expect that Dean would think of an excuse in this short time. Hand over the kingdom of God? She had long seen that Dean regarded the Corpse King as more important than his own life. From his usual behavior, she could see that most of the Corpse King was his former loved one. She had seen such things many times. Many deranged people were unwilling to give up on their infected relatives and lovers. They would imprison them and detain them by their side. They would even chop off their hands and feet, leaving only their bodies just to keep them by their side. However, she knew that Dean was different from these people. Even this Corpse King was different from other Corpse Kings. She didn't know the specific difference, but she knew that it was Dean's big secret. The three heard Dean's accent, and their expressions changed. The leader asked, "You're not from the kingdom of God?" Dean nodded. "I haven't joined the Bloodthorn Legion yet. I'm going back to join." Felicia also said, "Three sirs. He came out from the wall and is going to join the Bloodthorn Legion." The three of them looked at Dean, but didn't say anything. They didn't think too much about the King of Corpses. After all, it was impossible to control the King of Corpses in the kingdom of God. But it wasn't difficult to abolish the King of Corpses. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.